June 12th. And we have a few things on the agenda. An appointment, which is moving someone from an associate position to a full position on the Newtonville Historic District Commission. We're going to spend the bulk of the evening on the new material we have for the Village Center Overlay District that was in our packets. And then we're going to move to an item that Councilor Whitlock proposed to add a new use into our table of uses for craft beer establishments. So if you really want to talk about that, we'll advance our conversation on zoning as efficiently as we can. So I'm Deb Crossley, chair of the committee, and I am joined at the beginning of the meeting by Councilor Allison Leary, at large from Ward 1, President, and Councilor at large from Ward 2, Susan Albright. At the end of the table, Councilor Pam Wright, at large from Ward 3, and Councilor Holly Ryan, Ward Councilor from Ward 8. I know that, let's see if she's online yet. Councilor Vicky Danberg was going to join online, and she's driving, and she will be joining us in person at some point as soon as she gets here. At large from Ward 6 and vice chair of the committee. And I think
I'm on Winchester Street now.
Okay, just, you know, give us the ETA. Never mind. So
Okay.
and I think that may be it tonight for the committee. We are also joined by our steadfast committee clerk, Jacqueline Norton, and members of the planning department, Jennifer Kyra, your title just escaped, deputy director, second in command on the planning and development department, and Barney Heath was also here. Is he joining us for the meeting?
He's at finance for one item and he'll be back.
Okay, he'll be in a little bit. We're also joined by the law department, Andrew Lee. I'm sorry.
No, that's me.
Andrew Lee, and I'll wait to introduce our special guests until we get by this first item. Is Mr. Weinstein with us?
Yes, he is.
We do. Oh, would you like to please state your name for the record?
I am Joe O'Donoghue, planning associate, been with the department for about 3 months. Nice to
Yes,
meet you.
thank you. I've only been on Zoom with you a couple of times, so it always takes me a little while to get those names and titles down. Sorry about that. So thank you very much for that. Okay, the first item is 174-23, Your Honor, the mayor appointing, this is incorrectly worded, David Weinstein, it should be, to the Newtonville Historic District Commission. And this is for a term to expire on March 20th, 2025. Now, I want to say that this was not in our Friday packet. It was properly posted on the electronic posting board. And it was an error that we didn't have the materials for the weekend, but you might recall it wasn't all that long ago we appointed Mr. Weinstein as an associate member. And to be completely correct, even though Councilor Baker is not with us, could I have a motion to accept materials into the meeting? Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. Mr. Weinstein, are you able to unmute and join the meeting and tell us what it's been like on the Historic Commission for the time you've served to date and why you want to continue?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I've enjoyed it very much. I've been around Newtonville since 2000, so it's been a long time. I used to work on Newtonville Ave, sold real estate there for many years, and I know every street pretty damn well. I really enjoyed it. It's interesting to see what people are doing with their properties, and I like the opportunity to sort of guide them to do best practices as far as historic preservation. I've studied the subject for many years. Renovated my own house bunch of years ago, and I think the Upper Falls Historic District was very happy with what I did. So it's been good, and I look forward to another year, 2 more years.
I'll just let you know that you got a glowing recommendation from one of your colleagues on the Newtonville Historic Commission, Dave Morton. He called me today in part because it was unclear whether you were on the agenda tonight. So I'm glad we worked that out.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that so that we can get this taken care of.
Yes, we want to fill those seats, right?
Right.
So I see that, by the way, committee member and Councillor Lyle Baker has joined us online. I see his name there anyway. And I'll introduce the rest of the councillors as best I can when we get to our next item. So does anyone have any comments or questions for Mr. Weinstein? President Albright.
I'll just say thank you for being willing to serve on the Newtonville Historic District. And you live in a different ward, right? You live in Ward 4.
Correct. I'm in Lower Falls. I live in Lower Falls right now.
So,
But our Ward 4 councillor is not here, so
No.
it would be appropriate for you to move it if you would
that's
like.
what I thought I might do since Council Princeman is away. I would move approval and thank you for being willing to serve.
Unfortunately, Lower Falls does not have a historic district, as you know. I wish it did. There's some interesting houses here, but it's great to be able to do it in Newtonville.
Terrific. Okay, so thank you. We have a motion to approve on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you. I think that takes care of everyone online as well. That's unanimous. Thank you very much for stepping up and for continuing even after you've experienced the work. So
Oh, it's been great. You guys have any other questions of me?
we have had no questions, you know. I know that Councillor Princeman endorsed your position last time around, and he's not here today to say that, but I think we got to know you a little bit then, and apparently you've done well.
Good.
So thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, I will sign out then.
All right, enjoy your evening.
All right, have a good meeting. Bye-bye.
Okay, so also at our meeting are Councillor Andrea Kelly, Councillor, let's see, not seeing another councillor. Could you tell me?
Mark Laredo.
Councillor Mark Laredo,
Councilor Lucas.
Councillor Tariq Lucas. And anyone else?
That is it for council.
That's it for now. Okay, if you come in late, you might not get mentioned. And the next item is our usual business, but we have a clear focus this evening. We are joined by members of UTEAL and John Trementozzi from Landwise. And I'm going to mess this up again. I know we have Tim Love again, and Lauren Rapport. I am going to get that by the last meeting. Oh, I see. We also have Zachary Lamel online. I know he's home with child this evening, and but he's with us. So this is item 38-22, discussion and review relative to the draft zoning ordinance regarding village centers, and 39-22, which we carry as well because we're always looking at things relative to satisfying the MBTA law requirements at the same time. But tonight we're focusing on the economic analyses that were provided to us by Landwise for 2 different options for development in the MRT zone, which is the transition zone from our village center business districts. It's an all residential district, but it will allow for multifamily units. And the concerns at the last, I think at the early May meeting, I think that's the last time we focused in on this material because we had budget after that, were, you know, with the amount of additional or with the footprint and the metrics that were being put forward in the proposal, are we going to actually see any redevelopment in the way that we would like to. And so tonight, those analyses are before us and they were in our packet and they're quite extensive. So I'm going to ask for the planning department, I believe Ms. Kyra will open the presentation, and for us all to hear the presentation in its entirety without interruption. Even though there's some new material here that please hold your questions. And then we'll have plenty of time for discussion, really focusing in on this. The other piece of information we know everybody wants to talk about tonight, as always, is our calendar and particularly the engagement. I think we have an interloper. We're all, can you? Then you turn that thing off. Okay. Glad to have you. All right. So in particular, I know there's folks we want to talk about the engagement that has happened and that is planning to happen all the way up to our opening of the public hearing. But we're going to, after we have this presentation, we're going to talk and focus really in on the MRT district, what we think about it. There's some policy decisions to ponder, and then separately we'll take out our calendar and the engagement and so forth. I know folks have written in a bunch of questions. I don't think there'll be time to take those up this evening, but we have a meeting with the full council planned for next week, which is a perfect time to take those things up. And interim, I know the planning department, and you'll mention this as well, is planning to address people's concerns sometimes individually. But let's see how we do and how far we can get with the MRT material. And let's just pay attention to this presentation and all the work that's been done. I'd really like to not talk about protocol before the meeting. I'd like to really get into this subject matter, and then we'll talk about the calendar and so forth after we complete our substantive discussion. All right, thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Kyra.
We're gonna sit up at the table, is that okay?
Yes, please join us at the table. I'm sorry I didn't just say that. There's a perfect number of seats for you all.
Thank you, Jacqueline. All right, so as Madam Chair said, we're here to update with some additional analysis on the MRT zone this evening. We go to the next slide. Our agenda, brief recap of how we got here to this point, and then our team from UTL and Mainwise will go through some of the test fits and pro forma, looking both at new construction options in the MRT zone and the conversions. And then we'll briefly touch upon next steps. Next. Okay, so I know we've all seen this calendar a number of times now, but just a quick recap. We've been focusing on village centers for over 2 years now. This has involved multiple phases of engagement, of drafting zoning priorities, of working closely with this committee on turning those priorities into actual zoning framework, and then ultimately into zoning ordinance text and maps. We have released the second version of the draft zoning and the ordinance. And right now we're preparing for the public hearing that this committee will hold on June 26th, which has involved a good bit of outreach to make sure people know about the public hearing as well. So just quickly, some of the things we've done there, we've sent postcards to over 6,000 folks that are within the boundary, that are occupants, property owners, abutters, and butters to abutters. Has caused some level of confusion, but I think we've been responding to everyone who's reached out wondering why they got it and if there's some big new development proposed in the cemetery behind their house, which we've tried to clarify. So we've sent out the postcards. As you see, we've done quite a bit of engagement to this point. Anyone who has interacted with us, and we have their email address, whether you sent us a vision kit in the summer of 2021. You responded to our feedback tool in 2022 or sent us an email. You came to any of our info sessions or registered for any of our info sessions at the end of last year. You should have gotten an email letting you know that the public hearing is coming up and the ways that you can either attend or in person or on Zoom. We also use the mayor's newsletter, our newsletter, and are trying to get the word out as broadly as possible. Next slide. And again, the whole goal here is creating vibrant village centers. I know we focus a lot on MBTA communities lately because it is important that we come into compliance with state law. But to step back, we started this effort 2 years ago with the goal of making village centers better and doing what's right for village centers, creating vibrancy, allowing people to live there, supporting businesses, allowing for open spaces, a mix of uses to really make these active, vibrant spaces long-term for Newton. So that's still the goal. I think we're lucky to be in a place where we can also fulfill our requirements under the state law. But really the first goal has been vibrant village centers. And now I will hand it off to Tim Love from UTL to get into more of the detail on our data analysis.
Yeah, I just wanted to a kind of recap of the proposed zoning framework, because it's important to understand how the MRT district relates to what we've been working on so far. I think most people participating tonight know very well now that for a while now we've looked at a three-tiered approach to village centers, with the densest area being VC3, and then VC2, and then VC1. And the way that we propose to control the density of development is not through FAR, which is a little bit abstract, but a simpler set of rules that come down to the maximum number of stories you can have in each of the districts and the maximum size building footprint. It seemed to us the simplest way to get the scale of new buildings in the districts to be the right size from an urban design, from a kind of look and feel standpoint. And so the way that's developed is we're suggesting 4.5 stories in VC3, 3.5 stories in VC2, 2.5 stories in VC1, with the decreasing allowable size of the footprint along with the number of stories. I think everybody will also remember that the half story isn't actually a half story. In VC2 and VC3, it can either be a top floor that's a penthouse that's set back 7 feet from all of the edges, or it can be a pitched roof. And then when in the VC1 and the MRT district, it has to be a pitched roof, just because as you get to smaller buildings, you want those roofs to be pitched. That's the other piece of the code, which is dealing with the top of the buildings in ways that makes them nicely designed in a predictable way. I think partly because of our MBTA communities work, and partly because of feedback we got after the first version of the zoning proposal, we've reduced radically the area where VC1 can be, and where we're proposing VC1 happens, which is a 4,000 square foot maximum footprint. And what we've done instead is propose this new MRT district, which is where the VC1 in the earlier version was, and in a slightly larger area, partly because of the work we did on the MBTA communities work, which is that we needed to create one contiguous district, and there was a lot of work with this committee on how to deal with that. To tee up then what Lauren's going to talk about with the MRT district is that what we're proposing is that you can do one of two things in the MRT. This is a preview of what Lauren's going to talk about. You can do one of two things in the MRT district. You can either put an addition on the existing structure, with some form-based rules about where the addition can go. It can't be in the front, it can't be close to the front facade. It can only be half the footprint of the existing structure so that the existing structure is still the dominant thing that you see. And if you choose that path, you can have up to 6 units in that expanded structure. Or you can decide, I'm going to start over again, but then you can only do a 1,500 square foot structure. You can only do 4 units. And the recipe we wanted to come up with was row housing production, loosely speaking, but we wanted to make creative reuse of structures a little bit more appealing than tear downs. And the way we're doing that is you can do 6 units with the creative reuse, but you can only do 4 with the tear downs. But we still wanted the new construction 4-unit path to still be conceptually viable enough. And so that's a little preview of what we're going to show you, but that's our proposal for MRT, which has 2 paths there and not 1, and tries to balance all the issues that come up in at least one ZAP meeting before when we talked about DC1, and a lot of the neighborhood meetings that a lot of the feedback was concerned about DC1. So that's our, let's say, creative solution for a path there that we think makes sense. So we're going to be focusing on these 2 choices for MRT, and we're going to be showing you with, we picked 2 properties to run both the creative reuse and the new construction options to see what they look like, both in terms of urban form, but we had John here who will be speaking, run the numbers on those options as well. So that's what we're up to. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
That's not the whole story. Are we done?
I don't know what you
Oh,
want to say.
no. But we're gonna do that. That's people understand where we're headed. I'm getting nods from the councils here, so they appreciated my summary, but we're gonna. Oh, and one other thing is this is the current proposed zoning map of the tiers of the zoning. And to explain what we're going to be focusing on, it's the green parcels. The only VC1 that's left is along Route 9, and that's the purple. I don't know. Kathy, can you assist me there? The purple is all that's left of VC1 along Route 9. And then what used to be VC1 in earlier proposals is now MRT, which is which are the green zones that extend to different lengths from some of the building centers. So those are the areas we're talking about for the geography. And okay, I think at this point I'm going to actually turn it over to Lauren.
Okay, so as Tim mentioned, we're going to be walking you all through 2 different sites that we've chosen. One of them, which we'll start off with, is in Newton Center, or I should say right between Newton Center and Newton Highlands. The second site is in Newton Corner. And we've made test fits that look at both the new construction option and the multifamily conversion option. And following each test fit, John will walk through what the financial performance of each option will look like. We go next. So just to take a step back and remind everyone, the MRT districts are really meant to act as buffer zones between, the vibrant village center cores and the surrounding residential fabric. Our goal for MRT is really twofold, to be able to have those 2 options of development. So any new development that would happen, we would really want to see a smaller scale to fit in really well with the surrounding residential neighborhoods. But we also, at the same time, want to be able to encourage redevelopment through conversion to multifamily homes. Next. So with both of these options, we're taking cues from the VC1 metrics. So for new construction, we really want to emphasize smaller development. So the setbacks are in keeping with BC1. The heights that we're proposing, again, are in keeping with BC1. What we're really looking to test here is how small we can make that building footprint while still creating viable development. So some things that we tested and what we're showing tonight were developments that were 1,500 square feet, but we also tried an option that's 1,800 square feet because we wanted to understand what would be likely to happen, but also still be viable from a development point of view. And as Tim mentioned, the new construction option would allow you a maximum number of units that's capped at 4. While the multifamily conversion option, which is something that we still want to incentivize, would allow you to have up to 6 units. Some other numbers I want to walk through with the conversion option. The setbacks won't apply for the existing structure. These numbers are really meant to be for the new addition that's added. So the 20-foot front setback is going to apply from the front facade of the existing structure. And we're hoping that that move is going to be enough of a distinction between the existing structure and the new addition so that they read as separate masses. The other thing that we're hoping to help control the form of the addition is to make it, as Tim mentioned, up to half of the original structure's footprint. So that way it doesn't feel, we talked last time that we don't want it to feel like a carbuncle on the original building. So that's something that we're trying out as well. Next. We know that conversions do come with their own set of challenges. So making a single family home into a multifamily development does trigger building code upgrades. So that needs to be considered relative to access and egress for each unit. It also means that we need to add new plumbing for each unit's kitchens and bathrooms, as well as soundproofing and utility metering that's separate for each unit. But again, we are hoping that we can incentivize this development path by allowing for more units, so up to 6 relative to the new construction option, which is 4. And we are allowing for, up to 50% of the existing footprint to be part of the new addition. Next. So really just bringing this home, we want to be able to have MRT create potential for smaller units that will hopefully allow younger families and those maybe at a different income level to be able to get into the Newton market with more affordable units. We also know that with any of these, it's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. So understanding what the existing structure's condition is going to have a real impact on the viability for each one. But beyond just the structure itself, it also does come down to lot size. Can the lot itself actually accommodate being able to have that addition on the property or potentially a second structure? And what will that mean relative to context? These are all things that will have to be considered. So I think we can dive into the test fits and run everyone through what we've been noticing so far. So I'll kick us off with this first site. This is the one that's between Newton Center and Newton Highlands. It's on Center Street. It's a pretty small house, as you can see, on a fairly large lot. So we were really curious to see how this would feel with certainly the new development, but we also did try the conversion option. So this structure has a 5-bedroom, 2-bath within it. And what's interesting about it is you can see even within the image on the screen that there's much larger development already happening around it. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to see what our proposed metrics would feel and look like on this site. And this is currently an SR2 zone, so it is actually smaller than what's allowed by right. So I'm gonna tee it off to John.
Sure. So this first one shows the test bed under the 1,500 max footprint scenario at 2.5 stories on this lot, which is about just slightly less than a 1/4 acre lot. Those are all the lot sizes that we're going to be testing are similar size. So for this particular option, you end up with about 4,700 gross square feet. And then a reminder that only about 4,000 of that is actually sort of the net residential area if you account for about an 85% efficiency when you go to a multifamily unit, right? So things like circulation and stairways and things like that are netted out that square footage when you sell it. We looked at both the 3 and 4 unit configuration for this one. So the 4 units, you're looking at about 1,000 square feet per unit, which is decent, kind of two bedroom, maybe 2 plus den kind of scenario. And then the larger units for the 3 unit scenario, 1,300 is a little more flexible. You can get 3 bedrooms for sure, and that kind of layout. So the larger layout might be more attractive to the empty nester market, but the smaller units will certainly be more affordable, and I think might be more attractive to kind of small families and that kind of thing.
It's probably worth backing up here because it's what the entire code logic is predicated on is that the maximum area that you can build is the 2.5 stories. And so you run that backwards to get the maximum gross square footage.
Plus a basement.
Plus a basement. And then the market is going to decide, do I max out at the 4 units? That's as many as you can do. But then the units are, the market, quite frankly, a little bit on the small side. Or I do 3 units, and those are small 3 bedrooms. One of the things we've been discussing is, do we set a minimum number of units of 3 so that we're not back into big duplexes? I mean, there's a question about, I think one of the concerns with the current code is that these giant duplex projects are an issue. And so we didn't run the duplex. We know that duplexes work because they're being built all the time. But let's say that of those 2 choices, that's what the new code will allow to set up what Johnson talked about now. Does that sort of make sense? The market prefers big units.
And the assumption is one parking space per unit for these scenarios. So you can go ahead and go to the next one. So what we did is we ran what's called a land residual analysis, where it's a very, very basic performer, where basically we're looking at what kind of revenue might be generated from the multi-unit sales on this site. We do an estimated kind of hard cost to build and plus some soft costs. And then you take the costs out of the revenue and how much do you have left? That's the land residual. And essentially what that means is that's what the developer will have in terms of what they can pay for the land or the home, plus profit and any other kind of additional fees, right? So it's a very basic model, but what it's designed for is comparing across different scenarios. And so for this particular one, a couple of things to note. So you'll see on here, we're showing for the multifamily units, the average price per square foot, 680. That's for the whole 4,700 square feet. The actual price per square foot is closer to 800 for the actual unit when you take out all the circulation space. So, and that's in line with what we're seeing for multifamily units in Newton. Hard costs we got from talking to builders who are active in the area to get a sense for what they're seeing in the market. Obviously, that number can go up and down a little bit. It has stabilized a bit in recent months. And then the residuals of what they'll be able to pay for the land plus their profit. So I didn't actually look at the values of these homes until this afternoon. I pulled it up on Zillow just to get a sense. So for this particular home, Zillow has it at about 1.2 million today. So as a thought. So if you believe these numbers, there would be some additional profit in there for a developer who's willing to go for the multifamily scenario. For what it's worth, I think most of the builders who I talked to, who are excited about multifamily, there's some additional costs to doing multifamily, obviously with additional kitchens and bathrooms, the sound proofing and all that. But there are also some efficiencies as well when you're sort of replicating, having your subs in there and you're replicating the same activities across multiple units. So in general, we have the hard costs at a number that's pretty similar to single family construction, actually, based on those interviews. So this one would say, there's a little extra, whatever it is, 200,000, 250,000 extra when you do a multifamily scenario, if you were willing to take that risk. So that's the first one. So that's the 1,500 square feet. You can go to the next So this is the same idea, but this time we're testing the max footprint at 1,800. So slightly larger footprint, which gets you to 5,700 square feet. So an extra 1,000 square feet total under this scenario. So if you look at the, sorry, if you go back to point, if you look at the unit sizes, obviously that means at 3 or 4 units, the unit sizes have gotten larger. Okay, you can go to the next. So running that same type of analysis, very similar assumptions, it's just a larger kind of gross square footage that you're dividing up. This time your residual gets you up to 1.7 million. So a couple 100,000 over what the last scenario was. So certainly this scenario looks attractive to the development community. If you could get 5,700 square feet and cut it into 3 or 4 units at $800 a square foot, you're doing quite well under this scenario.
I think the big policy question here is, do we keep the footprint small? 1,500 square feet, would be just smaller buildings. But then are we disincentivizing 4-unit projects because the average unit size has to be around 1,000? Or should we err on the larger size for new construction, which gets the unit sizes at 4 units? If you can go back to that, John, or whoever, Jackie,
It was 1,200
1,200, which is a little bit more in a sweet spot, probably for the Newton market. But on the other hand, we want to incentivize adaptive reuse. So maybe we want this to be, we want it to work, but we don't want it to be so tantalizing that everyone tears their structures down. So I think that if you're going to ask your consultants this evening which one they favor, I think it's the 1,500 square foot option. But as always, we're open to feedback. Okay, next.
Okay, so then the third scenario we test on this lot is the conversion. So that's where you're keeping the existing home intact and doing a substantial renovation, and then you're adding the additional 50% footprint on as an addition, essentially a new construction addition, if you will. For this particular one, I think because of some of the setbacks and dimensional requirements, you're only getting to just shy of 4,000 square feet. So smaller than either of the 2 scenarios that we just looked at. If you cut it into 3 units, it would be about 1,100 per unit, which is not bad. I'm not sure what the floor plans look like in this one. It might be a little more challenging architecturally, but those are the numbers. And if you go to the next, what you'll see is, again, under these same assumptions, you're getting to 1.2 million. So much less attractive. Just given what we know about the potential value of this home, that one might not work. You're probably not going to have somebody take the risk on a scenario like that. We'll show you another conversion on a different lot that looks a lot different in a second.
And I just one other point about the rule set for the conversion. The addition can't be any taller than the structure, which is why we're not, we don't have a 2.5 story addition. We just have a 1.5 story basically.
Is that in the rules though? I don't remember seeing that at all.
When you get back to that, there's a bunch of metric kind of
It's a
questions.
really good question where this is,
Yeah.
we're still working on this, so we're happy to have it in the rules or not. But in this case, we made the addition the same height as the existing structure. That's the assumption that we made for our test bits. Lauren's nodding yes.
Okay, I do want to get you to finish your presentation, but Council Wright, I think there's a bunch of questions around what metrics will pass and what won't that are different from what the underlying zoning is. So let's get to that after we complete this.
You want to introduce this one?
Yes, okay, so now we are in Newton Corner. This is a site on Church Street. What's interesting about this property is it is a duplex. It was bought, I think a few years ago during the pandemic, and the owner decided to have an addition and renovate the ADU in the back. So we thought that it would be a good comparison then for us to come in and test our new both new construction and certainly the multifamily conversion options on this site, just as a good basis of comparison.
Okay, so slightly larger lot. Obviously, the existing home is larger than the one that we just looked at, but using the same kind of 1,500 max footprint and the same rules, about 2.5 stories, you get to the same 4,750 square feet. So we're going to look at, cutting that into 3 or 4 units. And then with the same kind of 4 parking spaces per unit. So when you run the scenario, the numbers come out the same, right? So you've got,
Not 4 parking spaces per unit.
sorry, 1 per unit, 4 total. Thank you. Sorry, big difference. That would be 16 parking spaces. That's too many. So again, similar analysis here, same square footage. So the analysis basically comes out to the same 1.4, 1.5 million of residual land value. I think, again, I looked this one up today. I think when it sold and was a 2021, I think it was 1.3, something like that. So just as a kind of comparison. And then you can go to the next. Okay, so that's the same site. Now we're at 1,800 square feet. And so you get to the 5,700 gross square footage. And again, cutting it into 3 or 4 units. You can go to the next. And so this one you get to 1.7 million. Again, applying the $800 per saleable square foot in the same construction costs. So, again, that looks substantially more attractive than the 1,500 square foot, but I think either one could work. Go to the next. So this is where I think it's pretty interesting. Under the conversion scenario, the way this one sets up, you're able to add substantially more square footage. So if you do a 50% kind of addition on the side, you get to a total building area of 10,000 gross square feet, which is obviously substantially larger than anything we've been talking about so far. The net area is about 8,500, and here we're showing that going into 6 units. So you've got a fairly large unit size, actually 1,400 square feet for 6 units, and then one parking space per unit. So a lot of square footage here. So you're probably not going to be surprised when you go to the next slide that it looks fairly positive. So with this one, I think the challenging thing is sort of blending the construction numbers, right? So I had some discussions with builders about, the new construction square footage is similar to the ones we just showed. The question is on the conversion. If you think of it as sort of a gut renovation, where you're keeping the roof, you're keeping the sort of envelope and the foundation, but you're essentially, gutting everything on the inside. What does that cost? There's a little debate across builders in terms of, or a range in terms of what they estimate. Some show it as being substantially less than new construction. Others have it kind of on par with new construction by the time you deal with all the stretch code factors and things of that nature. So we were conservative here, and we put in, I think, $10 a square foot less than new construction. And even doing that, you can see that there's a pretty large land residual here. This is the kind of project that I think developers would definitely be very enticed with. And so, whether or not you like the massing or the aesthetics of it, certainly economically it appears to be quite lucrative. So
It's a complicated, we had trouble getting close to the 50% footprint, given the width of the plan, and we've probably spent more time trying to design through it than we should have. But I think in the end of the day, to get windows in the bedrooms, and we think that would work if you put the new stair kind of in the middle of the new wing in the back, where there isn't a lot of window access, but we at least try to make it look good from the street as much as we did with this yellow thing we drew. But these are the kinds of lots that lend themselves the most to these to the conversion options. Bigger lots, if you can, the bigger existing homes lend themselves to conversion, which is good because it disincentivizes tear downs. This is really where the conversion option is much more attractive than a tear down.
That's what's happening on that street.
And these bigger footprint homes are the nicer homes from architecture. They tend to be the nicer ones from an architectural standpoint.
right, and obviously the condition of the existing home would have a factor as well, how attractive redevelopment scenario would be. If you go to the next one, just to kind of wrap up here, we can discuss. Try to just put these across for comparison's sake. So a couple of things to show you. So SFD new is just a new single family home at the same square footage. What would that look like relative to the multifamily units, just to give you a comparison? The 3 or 4 unit scenarios are the ones I just ran through. The conversion is the one I just ran through, and then all the way to the end, the new duplex. So that is one that we didn't actually do a test fit for, but I tried to just run some basic numbers on as a comparison to the conversion scenario of what might that look like relative to a duplex addition, just as a point of comparison. So again, you know, I think anything here that's sort of north of 1.2 million is sort of, you know, feasible or potentially attractive, given what we know about these 2 case studies. You probably want to test some additional sites, right? These are just 2, but you can get a sense for that based on the assumptions we're using today, they look fairly attractive.
The average,
Could you wait for a moment, please? So before we turn it over for questions, for everybody who's listening, could you please, again, explain the term of art? It's the one, I've never heard of that term, residual value.
Sure.
And if I understand it, it's the purchase price plus the profit. So you subtract the purchase price from that number, and that's what the profit
Correct.
can be, with all your other assumptions being.
Correct. And so I didn't want to make an assumption about what the purchase prices were,
Yeah.
right? We certainly could do that. We could say, you know, for these homes, we think they're an average of some number and just show you the profit, but at this point didn't feel comfortable, you know, making that assumption across.
Okay,
all these.
I'm just thinking a lot of people who are watching
you do the
don't
math.
know that.
Right.
Like last one that you.
Right, and part of the reason we model it that way is, you know, if you talk to folks in the development community, they'll say the land price or the home price is sort of a shock absorber, right? I mean, you can sell them for what you can sell them for. The cost of construction, yeah, you can try to value engineer it to a certain degree, but it's gonna cost what it's gonna cost. And so the what you can pay that's left over, the land residual is sort of the shock absorber. And you know, sometimes there's an existing home on the site, sometimes it's a greenfield, it depends. But obviously in Newton, it's probably an existing home, but in other places we work, it could be just the land.
Okay, I just want to make sure folks who are listening understand that term, because I didn't.
Yeah.
And I mean, I figured it out, but yeah.
That's a good question.
Was that the end of the presentation?
one more slide.
Yeah, if you just go back, I just want to point, so I think you're gonna ask about the average unit size,
Yes.
that's really gross square footage.
Okay, it's the average building size.
It's the overall building size, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, we'll change that.
And just a couple of key dates before we wrap up. Next Tuesday, we'll be doing a briefing before the full city council meeting. I think it starts at 6.
Yes.
6 o'clock. And then there'll be a public hearing June 26th, both in council chambers and online on Zoom. The public hearing will stay open through the fall, and then keeping an eye on the end of the year as our deadline for adopting zoning compliant with MBTA communities.
Thanks, and I just want to explain this chart because I called the department about this, where it says public hearing, so we're gonna have one night of public hearings in June 26th. We're leaving it open during the summer. We're not going to hold public hearings over the summer. We're gonna use the summer as a time we've heard from you and to do a lot of work in the committee. And then reopen it in September. It doesn't mean it's gonna end in September. It could go all the way into October. We just don't know. That's why it's a dotted line. So we're gonna hear from everybody, and we expect we'll be hearing from you through the summer as well. We have probably hundreds already of testimonial letters and so forth logged in the file. That's in every Friday packet. Everybody can see what people have said throughout our entire term here. And we expect we'll hear from you some more once you get more familiar with the particulars of this proposal. So I'd like to open it up for questions from the committee first on the MRT. If you don't raise your hand, I'll call on you. But I see the hands, and really want to focus in on the metrics. Certainly questions for clarification, but also to talk about what we think about the size for new construction relative to the opportunities for adaptive reuse. So Councilor Danberg, then Larry, then Baker.
On the 6-unit possibility, is there a minimum number of square feet per unit? What I'm wondering is how many, I know that we are trying to incentivize slightly smaller units, but if someone has, let's say, not enough square footage and decides that they are, and there's not a very large building on it, but they decide that they're going to chop it up into 6 250 square foot units. Can they do that? Or is there a minimum number of square feet per unit?
We haven't thought of that, but it's certainly something that we can consider and add to the proposal.
I'm not making a value judgment on whether that's good or bad.
We
I'm just
can't-
asking.
Yeah, so it would be, there's a building code minimum, it might be 250.
I think it's 250.
We, per MBTA communities law, we can't put control, we can't regulate unit size.
Oh,
Oh,
So we can't put a minimum
okay.
or maximum.
that's right. No, we can't do that.
Seems so agreeable.
And you also mentioned that bigger existing homes have kind of an advantage because they already have the space. If you showed the red house that was a 1-story house, and because you can only build an addition the same height or small or shorter than the existing home. If you have a cape or a 1-story building, you're really at a disadvantage. And the better option would probably be to tear the place down and again, no value judgment, but this the criticism of that could be that we are incentivizing tearing down our starter homes.
Yeah, and that's an assumption I think Tim and Lauren used from a design perspective. It's not currently written into the ordinance, so it is something we can discuss as to whether you can max out that full 2.5 stories for the addition or not. I mean, these small capes and ranches are often where they're being torn down today.
Yes, that's true.
Right, we're hoping that allowing for 4 units in new construction or the 6 in a conversion is creating a new type of starter home. You're not really seeing the single family, as many single family starter homes. So it does make it is geared more towards converting some of the larger existing homes. From everything we've heard, the conversations we've been having, those are often the homes that people don't want to see torn down. They have some more historical or architectural value, and there may be some opportunities on some of those other sites that have smaller homes to get a still relatively small new construction with multiple units.
Okay, and my last question this time around is gonna be, is VC1 gone?
No, it's along Route 9.
Along Route 9.
Oh, okay.
Just would like to add to your question about those metrics, and I think Councilor White was thinking along these lines too. In comparing that new construction with what's allowed by the underlying zoning, I wonder how it competes, because the underlying zoning allows 2.5 stories, so you can add a story to the primary dwelling.
Yeah.
Why do we not, it's just a question, again, no value judgment, I like that. Why are we not allowing someone to put under the new zoning a 2nd story over the existing home? Is there a rationale for that? And I understand the other objectives, which are about, preserving significant architecture. Generally, a ranch house is, or small 1.5 story house is not in that bucket. But, somebody might grow their family, have a couple more kids or whatever, and want to, and actually, from a construction point of view, it's probably a little less expensive. It's expensive in any case, but,
Good
But it-
environmentally though.
good environmentally, less footprint, you know, so just wanted to throw that out there because it just jumped out at me. Oh, okay, so we're allowing an addition, same, can't go above the height of the existing building. If we did, it would look pretty good, you know, that would not be contextual. I can't imagine how you would make it contextual, maybe I just don't have the imagination, but, you know, why not?
I think these are, both these points are in all of the thinking through loopholes or things we haven't thought about, at least consciously talked about. I think they're both great points. I personally would have no problem allowing people, even with an existing structure, to max out the number of stories. I only worry about, in many cases, the weird things that you might get if you allow that. And I think that,
If you do allow it, okay.
and I think the spirit of this, because this is all
Yeah.
as of right regime, is that we want to, as much as possible, design a new code to get the most positive design outcomes possible. And so there's a couple of scenarios. One is that I think we were landing on additions can't be any taller than the existing building. And then the risks are low, that it's got to be 20 feet back from the front facade, it can only be 50%. I think the full range of architects in Newton would do a good job with that, right? I think if we said, you can, even if you have a 1.5 story tall cape, you can go to 2.5 stories and you can have an addition that's, you know, half the square footage. And then I'm imagining a developer and their architect might see that that's the path for the most gross square footage. And then how much of the existing cape do you have to keep to get credit that it's conversion to get? I mean, if you start to follow that path, if you keep the studs, but you get rid of the cladding, do you have to keep the cladding and then you have a seam to, I mean, if you follow the logic
We've
of
had a
that,
code like that.
yeah, if you follow the logic of that, I think,
Yeah.
I think I don't think that would be hard to kind of control the quality of the outcome. That's my concern. Now, you're raising another issue about the underlying zoning being so attractive to developers to build these giant 2-unit projects, and they're everywhere in Newton now. And that's a whole question about overlays versus changing the zoning eventually, and a whole other set of things. So
We do have a docket item in to take up after this. Soon after this to address that, but it's just, well, I have Leary, Baker, right,
Can I,
on the same topic.
on the same topic?
Okay, go ahead.
So, first off, I support going 2.5 stories on the addition, but I think what I really support is putting the wording in here is the addition, any addition for any of it has to mirror or complement the original house, that it's just not a box to put on there. The one thing, like you said, it's at least 20 feet behind, so it's not going to be as dominating. The second thing is, there's not, where close to the village centers, they're mostly 2.5 story buildings. There's not a lot of little capes there. You're going to find a few, but most of them, you're not going to have this situation.
Right.
So, and then the other thing is, if you do have the little capes, they tend to have lower ceilings and things like that. You're probably going to get a tear down anyways, because it doesn't really fit in today's. But I think you should be allowed, but I think we need to put the wording so that and most architects will do a good job, but there's some out there that won't. You just can't just put a box in the back.
yeah, I think those are all good comments. I think, I mean, this is a difficult thing we're trying to do here, which is that we're trying to create a balanced regulation that lets the market make a decision, right? 4 units or 6 units. and then kind of figure it out on a case by case basis. And that's why we picked a smaller, 1.5 story cave on a lot that we sensed would be big enough. And then we picked a much bigger house that I think is more consistent with a lot of the things that are in the green, our proposed MRT district. We wanted to test 2 scales to see what the outcomes were. But these are all great comments.
Okay, I'm gonna go around.
Okay,
You're
just to
next.
follow up on that discussion, which Councilor Wright brought up, which I think is critically important, the good design. I'm very familiar with Church Street and I was wondering if you noticed 217 Church Street, which is like 3 houses away, that was recently redone quite well. They're both like 1830 farmhouses in that area. And it's 2 units, I believe. They had to lose the wisteria and a large beech tree in the back, unfortunately. But it was done quite well. It's not a box. I think you're probably familiar with that one. There's some controversy with the beech tree missing. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was we haven't talked too much about open space or how much would be taken up by parking and things like that. And what I find, it is a very residential area, and what bothers butters, I think, is the loss of green space or very close quarters. So I'd like to hear more about how we can still increase the number of units, reduce unit size, and still have some green area and buffer zone in those areas. And then I also was thinking about the second story too, and I think that's something to consider. But then I didn't quite follow you about you favored the 1,500 square feet versus the 1,800 square feet, and I'm not sure I quite fully understood that. And I was wondering if you could talk about it a little bit more.
Just it results in a smaller building. And so I think if people choose to tear down, the resulting building would just be more likable. And secondly, it skews toward creative conversion being maybe a choice the market might make a little bit more often. I think those are the 2 reasons. And I don't know, it's because we tried them both and thought about how they would look and feel. And
Yeah, I think there's some areas where the 1,800 square feet would work better and you could get those 6 units in. I don't think necessarily the 2.
but you can only do 4 max with new construction anyway.
Okay.
So that the 6 to 4 is the first message to the market. Oh, let's try the 6 because we can do more units. It's the only district where we're proposing a unit cap. And so that already will get I think the development community to explore these conversions with some seriousness. And then we wanted to also make the units in the new construction be smaller from a kind of diversify the housing stock logic. Because once you get to the bigger footprint, you're almost getting to, you did 3 units with the bigger footprint, you're getting to the really big units that the market already supplies. Is that true, John?
Yeah, and I think the concern is with the 1,800, if it gets too attractive, it won't be just capes next. It's, oh, these older colonials we're going to tear down because there's enough incentive to do that. So I think we're trying to strike a balance where it's attractive to the development community to think about doing these 3 and 4 unit new construction, but not so attractive that
It's the home run. It's the
yeah,
home
that
run
they start looking
choice.
to tear down everything. So that's what we were trying to do. I don't know. I'm not suggesting that we have 100% nailed it, but
Is this brand new or you're seeing a similar kind of design or zoning change going in other communities?
We completely made it up for you. Everything has been customized for Newton.
Not Somerville's not doing it?
No. Their code is much more complicated.
So it might be worth putting up one of your slides. I noticed that on this point of open space, Councilor Leary, the 1,500 square foot test pit where usable open space is only required for lots over 30,000 square feet at 30%. This one gives us 58% open space. So more than we require today, and that's not, it's because of the footprint in combination with the setbacks and so forth.
Okay.
So, and then for the 1,800 square foot, it only drops down to 55%.
Right.
So this, the design standards themselves are creating open space.
Yeah.
Because.
The maximum footprint de facto, unlike an FAR regime, that's the maximum footprint for new construction for all of the MRT. So for most of the lots, you're gonna get a lot of open space. For some lots, you'll get less, but that reflects historical building patterns too.
And they won't all, you can't fit this much on every lot in the MRT, right?
At the 18
Or the 15.
or the 15 now.
No, and it depends on whether you're providing parking or not. This is assuming one space per unit. These are pretty much always going to be surface parking.
This is assuming one space per unit. Oh,
Yeah.
that's interesting too. So, okay, because that's a policy decision we have yet to make that we've discussed we might want.
This is what we think the market will want to
Right.
provide. This,
Yeah.
this is imagining no parking requirement, but the market's gonna want to provide a parking space. So that's what we,
Okay.
for the test, that's what we decided to use.
Great, I think that's perfect.
Reasonable.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, Council Larry, keep going. You all set? All set? Okay, my list, Baker next.
I didn't think I would come to Boston to get warm from California. Appreciate, I've listened as much as I could in the car in the airport. I guess my question is, I read in the report from the planning department, for the presentation, this is comparison between these two alternatives, but not against the current underlying zoning, as I understand, right?
Well, that's been part of our conversation, which is the current duplex zoning, which.
I understand, but part of the challenge of this conversation that we're all having is we've assume this is an overlay rather than a change in use, right? That's been, we've had that conversation earlier. Property owner, assuming it's an overlay, has that choice. And so, as we go forward and you do perhaps a second iteration of this, I think it's important to compare the existing use, the existing zoning, the proposed four proposed, so that everybody can understand a little bit about the choice that we're making both as a matter of policy and as a matter for the individual property.
Yeah, and John and his analysis, maybe we can get the slide back up again.
That's the last one.
I think it's the last one. The challenge, Councilor Baker, is you're right, the new duplex residual value is higher than many of the options, but not as high as the convergence 6 unit.
So, and that goes to the second point, I guess, is that this whole idea of new residual value is as indicated, not a term of art that we've kicked around very much. But as I understand it, it is to say, you back up what you think this property will sell for, what you think it will build for, and then you say, okay, what's left over is how much I can pay for it and take home, right?
That's right, correct.
So it's, but the price paid to a property owner is theoretically, if you're a builder who's going to stay in business, has got to be lower than the residual value, right?
That's right, absolutely.
Okay, so the property owner who's, and in most of these cases, we're assuming, I think, from the conversation that these changes will not likely be done by the property owners themselves. There may be a few. This requires a lot of rework that is not what you normally do in in your own house. So that the question from a property owner's point of view is, okay, if I sell it to a developer today for whatever, again, these residual values are hard to, but you're making comparisons across based on residual value, meaning the developer's choice, but also marbled in there is the property owner's choice. And some of it involves some level of risk management from the builder's point of view. Is it less risky to build fixed or more risky to build through to, or, I don't know what that calculus looks like, but I do think it may just bear watching as we go forward.
Yeah, I think another way to think about it is that any zoning change affects land values generally, and the market figures that out pretty quickly. Brokers, developers, and what we've been talking about with John is if a single family home then sold as a single family home, it's worth X 1.2 million for the purposes of this conversation. And then the question is, against that scenario, based on the analysis that John's done, how much conceptually, how much would the property sell for based on these different development scenarios? And you're right, the new duplex is more attractive than the new 3 or 4 unit, which is another policy issue we're all going to have to grapple with. The 6-family conversion is more attractive than the new duplex, but these other things we've been modeling in this analysis isn't.
Yeah, so that's sort of the economic analysis. There's a macroeconomic analysis I assume we'll get to at some point, which is to say what kind of tax revenues will these generate versus what kind of cost will they incur for the city. That's the number one issue that we always we can't formally consider, but it is part of understanding the impact. But I guess the other piece is a really kind of a minor one compared to the big picture here. But we have tried to do some things to preserve the longer term housing stock in the sense of rentals or ownership rather than short term. So we have we went through a whole process of creating a limit on Airbnb on certain situations. And for instance, the accessory apartment ordinance doesn't allow you to rent for short-term rentals because of precisely that concern. How much the accessory apartment ordinance would carry over in these scenarios as well is another question of whether this is it. You're sort of saying, this is your development opportunity and this is it. Now, if you stay with the existing zoning, you've got the EDU option, so it doesn't mean it goes away. But I think it's important to sort of say, if you want to take advantage of the new version of things, you don't get a bite at the apple plus a bite at the orange. You know, you've only got one thing to go for. And then the parking issue, I think, is a significant one because of the potential impact on the surrounding properties. The argument in the commercial centers is that you're going to be treating this a little differently, but in these areas, you're right up the buffer zones. And we've got a whole question, about what is going to happen to our on-street parking ordinance. And I, for one, have always been in favor of having some requirements rather than even only to the developers. I'll just state that as my preference. I know that may not be the committee's preference at large, but I do think we have to think about it because part of the challenge of this whole exercise is to say, all right, does the first person who plays sort of win the lottery, but the next person who plays doesn't have a place to put their car, and the third person who plays doesn't, because the various this sort of consumes the opportunity on the street if that's street parking, and if it's on-site parking, then that's a lot of cars to manage. As I think Councilor Danberg has reported from time to time about Chase Street. So I think that the part of the difficulty of sorting through even an isolated scenario is to say we're zoning on the theory that everybody can play in this game. It's not just you're the lucky one who gets the first bite, and then the next person gets a little less to eat, and the less when in the terms of the community resources that enable these to go. So I think we have to assume, for purposes of the zoning design, what if everybody does play? I know the argument is made that nobody will play right away, right? Some people will start, there'll be some experiments and all of that. But for the zoning design, you want to design it so it says, okay, what if everybody does do that? Can they all fit together in this environment? Are there going to be spillover impacts that we hadn't anticipated because of multiple conversions rather than just a single conversion? One conversion we can manage, 2 conversions maybe, 3 or 4 on the street, what happens then? And so part of the challenge of your work, it seems to me, is to extrapolate from the individual circumstance to the multiple circumstance, and then you go to the community circumstance, it goes to the level of service and demand and what kind of revenue offsets we're going to have. Those are conversations that I assume we will continue to have, but I hope that we can have them with some guidance in advance. Finally, I do recall that at least in the accessory apartment ordinance, we have some provisions in the as of right language about having the structure be somewhat harmonious with the existing structure. There was a conversation about, wanting the addition to be kind of an add-on as a box that doesn't really fit. And we maybe want to go back and look at some of that just as precedents could be drawn.
Yeah, I think that's related to Councilor Wright's comment, and that could certainly be included. As much as we can, we're hoping to use dimensional standards as a way to control that, and it's non-discretionary then, and then there's no, the dimensional rules.
It's very hard to say a dimensional standard says you can't be ugly.
Right.
True.
And then the test fits we did.
Well, that's the point. It's void for Vegas. That's why you have special permits in historic districts.
The test fits we did in both cases always included one parking space per unit in the layout.
And I applaud that because I think that's a reasonable question. And again, the question of the open space, is that open space being counted as parking? Is it, what's happened with that?
Right.
And how is it done? It's as much as I think we'd be interested to see what the options are to have fewer cars, people still bring cars, they're going to put them somewhere, how are they going to park them on the site, how's that going to work? But those kind of things I think really are worth, once you get past the sort of gross analysis, into another round of sort of site-specific analysis and say, all right, how does this literally work on the ground? And what does it mean? Can we have a sense of how that does? And then what happens if you do the one next door, the one next door, the one next door to that? And then see what the streetscape looks like and what does the impact of the community look like. So that's my general comment.
On one point that you made, can I just put forward, and please tell me if I'm right about this, but our accessory apartment ordinance only allows one accessory apartment per lot or 1 and 2 family existing dwellings only. So the minimum here is 3 families.
Right.
And it has to be in order to comply with MBTA communities for new construction or the,
And you can't do an ADU,
Yeah.
right?
I don't
can't
think,
do
yeah,
it.
I think that's
Can't
correct.
do it.
It's just that that's still a choice. of the
Here's-
business.
Can I just read the language, because I did provide it to the planning department, what Counselor Baker is saying in 6.7.1.E.3 rules for detached ADUs. Exterior alterations to an existing accessory structure or the creation of a new accessory structure are permitted, provided they are in keeping with the architectural integrity of the existing structure and or the principal dwelling on the lot and the residential character of the neighborhood. The exterior finish material should be the same or visually compatible in type, size, and placement as the exterior finish of the principal dwelling unit on the site.
yeah, I understand. I do want to move around the room in order, but I'll just say ISD hates that language. And they don't know what to do with it. Because it's whose opinion matters. What's compatible? Do you think that you can have wood siding and brick siding? Or what? What doesn't make the grade, the cut? So I just want to put that out there because we have that ordinance, we have that language. It was a compromise language to, I think maybe it makes some of us feel better, but it really isn't enforced or used. So I think we have to be really careful about stuff like that. That's just my opinion, but I did want to say ISD hates that language. Yeah, so.
Well, we got a new commissioner, maybe.
I doubt he can enforce them better.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're working closely with law and ISD to make sure whatever we write can be implemented. And like Tim said, we'll look at whether there are some options similar to that language, but in general, we've been trying to use dimensional controls to make sure that the overall form is compatible, because, you know, people can change the cladding and details over time anyway. But if the general forms are compatible, then we're usually in a pretty good place.
Madam Chair, this is Andrew Lee. Can I chime in real quick on this?
Oh, okay. I think Attorney.
Oh, Attorney Lee, can I just see what he wants to say about this? Thank you. Attorney Lee?
Thank you. I just wanted to piggyback off what you were saying, as well as what Jen Cairo was mentioning with regards to making sure that the design standards are really what's being focused here in terms of dimensions. The language that was quoted for the ADUs, it is concerning if we try to implement it here, because we're talking about building materials and methods of construction, which we're explicitly prohibited from doing under zoning. The point I'm trying to make is we've already kind of looked at this village center zoning draft with that lens and making sure that we really are focusing on the dimensional requirements. However, we will also look to see if there's something in terms of those dimensional requirements that we can put in that somewhat addresses this concern.
In other words, red line rules is what you're, I understand there's a new draft or slightly edited draft that's available now. We should probably all get that. Okay. And I did want to mention too, we are joined in the room by Councilor Ripoff for some time now, and I keep getting to.
I hope he's having a craft beer.
Counselor, I hope you brought some for all of us. Counselor Ryan.
We're going to start with a quick history lesson. When we first started to see two-story homes in Oak Hill Park, they were this. They kept the slab, the first floor. They cut the top, the attic off, and built the second floor. And then now those are being torn down. So it was done. It was done pretty regularly. You can go down there now and you can say, well, there's a ranch, single floor ranch that I still live in. There's a house that added a second floor but kept the slab. And then there's a McMansion, first group of McMansions, and then the new group of McMansions that uses every bit of setback and builds for over 4,000 square feet, put homes on them. And you want to get some more open space and bring the setbacks in. Because when you work down there, you know what I'm talking about. I mean, there's just no yards. Whatever, but I just wanted to say that was done, and it was done on a regular basis. But those are being torn down along the further. So Oak Hill Park, the original was ranch houses, small split levels, and then larger split levels that went right up to Dedham Street. Now everything's being torn down, the large and small split levels and all the ranches and two-floor ranches, we'll call them, or whatever. But anyway, you started to get me when you talked about the affordable, but then you, right again, you say that we can't say what, you know, enforce size of that. And that's too bad. I mean, I worked for a state funded company, contract company for 24 years. They're not perfect and they make more mistakes than they don't. And this is a mistake. This is a mistake because, and you said, just let me finish. You said Newton's Market, you know, prefers the bigger units and it'll tell us what we want. So are we just conceding that we're not going to have affordable homes?
No, that's precisely why we're recommending the 1,500 square foot maximum footprint. Because if you only do 3 or 4 units, the biggest unit you can do is 1,200 square feet. And if you do 4 units, you can only do 1,000 square foot gross. So what's smart about the code that we're writing is it doesn't limit the unit size directly, but it limits it indirectly through footprint and number of stories. So you can't do the big units you can do in the, I mean, you'd have to tackle the duplex existing code in a different way. But if you go back to that page that has the 1,500 square foot new build. With the maximum number of units, we seem to be missing that.
It's just covered.
No. Go to the.
Keep going up.
Keep going on.
Yeah.
Maybe go to the other one.
First, yeah.
Because those numbers might be wrong.
I think there's a typo now.
There's a typo on that one. Which is, go back one more slide. Sorry, Jackie.
There we go.
So this, what's interesting here is that if we set the 1,500 square foot maximum footprint, the biggest unit you could do if you chose the 3-unit option was 1,350 square feet, which is a lot smaller than the units that are built through the current code. And if a developer wanted to max out the number of units they could do, which is 4 units, they could only do 1,000 square foot units. So that's how we're controlling maximum unit size indirectly through the form.
And this will get a price point we're not seeing right now. So the building size is around the same size or smaller than some of the single family homes. Certainly smaller than the duplexes. So we're getting 5,000-6,000 square foot single family homes or individual units in duplexes. Those are always going to go for more than if you had 3 to 6 units in that same building. It's still not always going to be very affordable. These aren't going to be 50% AMI units. But this will get a price point that we're not seeing. And then the larger housing developments is where we get those deed restricted affordable units. So it's, having to come at it from a number of different angles to get a range of housing price points and sizes that we're not seeing now.
But by right, wouldn't they choose to not build extra bathrooms and everything else? I mean, how do we get to below $1 million how do we get to $650,000 for 1,000 foot of 900 size unit? I mean, I just see it as just conceding that Newton is, we'll build a lot more housing, but it's not going to be affordable.
You have a price in one of these charts, a sale price now?
Yeah, so if you go back to those units, and so 1,000 square feet under this analysis is about 800,000. It could be slightly less, could be slightly more, but that's what this analysis is showing. So
And that's because of land cost.
That's the price.
that's the market.
What it's worth on the market, 1,000 square feet.
So whether you think about affordable or not, but that's a part that doesn't exist today, right? So rather than having a single family, 500,000 square foot home that sells for whatever it is, $3 million, you're cutting the 4 units into 800,000 each. That's the idea.
And then when we move out of MRT into the other zones, whenever we have 7 or more units, that's when we'll get the actual deed restricted condos or rental.
Right, I'm just, so the real affordable housing is the Armory and Cable.
Yeah,
That's about that,
deeply,
right?
yeah, the deeply affordable is where, you're taking out the land cost, right? So, that's outside of what we're trying to do here as a city. We should still be pursuing all of those opportunities where we can to get that deeply
We
affordable.
need middle class housing. We need workforce housing.
Yep.
And I mean, the two things I believe the state is doing wrong with this is not letting us say size even close to a T station. And, we're still, having a problem with the, that having businesses on the first floor and I know we don't need it, but not being able to count the housing on the top as MBTA community.
There's still pushing on that.
I know we are, we need to push, and we're not the only city or town that's doing that, because it's wrong, it's just wrong. All right, that's mine, I will keep hopping, so.
It's okay. President Albright.
Next. So, something that you said early on, I just want to make clear. So you said that we're not requiring 3.
No, that
We are
we're requiring at least 3 units and up to 4 with the new build.
Okay,
Yeah. we are.
so it has to be three
Yeah.
or
Right.
more units, okay.
Yes.
So can we look at the slide that is the Newton Corner 6-unit conversion? Because that one looks to me like it fills the lot quite a bit. And all the complaints that we get about the new construction or the tear downs and the new construction that build everything all the way out to as far as they can, that's pretty much what they look like. So I'm wondering if people are gonna be happy with that if we allow it.
Yes.
And what should we do to fix that problem? Martin?
Setbacks, increase your setbacks.
So then what is the side setback? Is there only 5? 7.5.
Although this is showing 10.
This one's 10.
Well, this is actually more than that because we've got the driveway.
Yeah.
So that's helping a little bit, but you are right in that it is taking up a lot of the lot. And part of that does have to do with just the physical area required to fit 6 parking spots, which is 1 per unit
Okay.
on this lot.
The other thing is the usable open space. Right now in our zoning, we require 50%.
So this is 30%.
37.
And that's only 30% if it's over 30,000 square feet, but right now.
This is what it is actually showing.
37
Right.
is there, but in our present zoning, it's 50%.
Yeah.
So this is a balance, we're trying to incentivize the preservation and conversion of existing homes.
Yes,
There's some trade-offs with that.
yes.
You're having to work with the existing layout and it's fit in the circulation and the new plumbing and the additional units. The parking, and we're trying to get more units here and keep the existing house. So we are gonna have less open space. There are some trade-offs to doing so. It may fill up more of the lot. What we're seeing now is what, for the most part, tearing down and the new structure is a box that takes up most of the lot. This, you're keeping what's there and just adding on a bit and it's set back. So from the street, it's not as overwhelming. And we're still requiring the pitched roof, which we're not requiring under the existing zoning. So it is going to be bigger, but that is part of what's making this more attractive in these scenarios than the duplexes that we're seeing today.
Well, it's more attractive because it has more units and we like that, but we don't necessarily, not we, I think the general public at large isn't going to like the fact that it takes up so much of the lot. It's the white part of the building exists, isn't
Right.
it? And the yellow is
Yeah.
what you added on.
That's right.
And that was the best architecturally sound.
Designing.
We play the best architect that we can while trying to get as much square footage under the rule. It's a stress test of, we write a draft rule and then we pretend like then we're trying to maximize the density of playing by our own rule,
Yeah,
and then we make it look nice. So this is as much square footage as you can get under our draft zoning.
okay.
But you can see that the additions pushed back 20 feet from the front.
I want to make sure I understand.
From the front facade.
From
of
the
the
front
existing
facade of the existing, okay,
structure.
that's got it out.
Fully enclosed, but we wanted to make sure, part of it was we didn't want to push the structure too far, because then we wouldn't be able to get the parking to work. So as with other test pits, parking is really driving the form of the
Yeah.
one.
I wonder, just something to consider, because I wondered about that when I looked at this too, is you were measuring from the porch, whether it's enclosed or not, doesn't matter. It's not the main facade of the house, and maybe we should measure from the main facade of the house.
We went back and forth on that. We said, well, what if the porch is the full width of the front facade, does it count as the front?
And this is,
But we were playing the developer.
I understand,
Trying to
and thank
gain
you
the
for
code
that,
that we-
because I looked at it and I went, oh.
It was a bunch of those.
You could push it back, you could add on to that other part, because you got a rear setback of 50 feet. And we're saying it's 15.
Maybe we're trying to get the parking to fit though. We were being truthful about the parking layout.
so if you pushed it back to 20 feet from the actual facade, not the porch.
It was
It
a
would-
better of 5 feet difference, I think.
Yeah, we couldn't get 6 parking spaces.
Okay,
Because the cars wouldn't be able to back out of the parking space, they'd be stuck forever.
Okay.
Or-
It probably also looks closer to the side lot line, because you say there's a 7.5 foot setback plus a driveway,
No, sorry, it's just the driveway.
just the driveway.
Just the driveway.
Okay.
It's very tight in this part.
So the
Okay.
driveway's in the setback.
Hmm. Okay,
so I just
anybody
have-
can do a bad design. You know?
I don't think it's, I mean,
For a driveway, for 6 units, doesn't the driveway have to be wider than that?
No.
No, it's 10.
Well, I'd like to ask this question, it's on the same subject.
It's on the same subject. To follow up on President Albright's inquiry, I'm interested in the properties that surround it. So for example, on that site, there's an existing structure that seems to be close to that lot line. And then there's something in the back that's going to now be looking at 6 parking spaces. So part of the challenge that, again, I want to just come back to, which is to say, what if you do this in one lot, but then what do you do with it in multiple lots? But in the meantime, what's the impact on the abutters that are immediate and nearby? Because the special permit process has given us a vehicle, if I can use that term, to try and accommodate some of those collateral impacts. But we don't have that. We have to design them in this model up front. And so I think that some of the, for instance, the question I would ask why you would encourage the multi-unit conversion here, in a situation where the existing neighboring structure is close by, do you have a deeper setback because of that? I just don't know the answer to that, but or do you have an existing structure in the rear? Do you have to have some screening requirements you might not otherwise have if it backed up to a commercial building?
yeah, I was wondering
I
about
mean,
adding.
I just don't, I think part of the challenge of this is to satisfy the abutters who normally would have some sense of a participation in the process through a special permit for such an extraordinary structure, to have some protection that is built in that gives them, not individually, because they don't know what's going to happen, they're not here, but for us to be able to talk to the public and say, well, we're not necessarily going to drop this problem in your backyard. Literally, there are going to be things to safeguard it.
Could we require screening?
We do.
Yeah, it's in the text.
Yeah, so we do require screening adjacent to residential properties.
Not
So
around there.
Kind of screening
It would-
for the landscape buffer right now from the back of the parking.
We need to really blow this.
So
up.
it would, yeah, it would be a
It looks
landscape
like it.
buffer or a fence, or some combination of fencing and landscaping.
I think if you could blow this up, it would help a lot.
When you get to the next iterations, you're going to have to come down from that sort of neighborhood scale down to a little lower resolution or higher, I don't know what the right term is, but to show what happens actually on the site with this.
Just straight down.
That'll happen when we get illustrations in the text eventually.
Well, but in the planning and the process design, I mean, you've got to be able to understand those things.
The truth is that we did everything possible to make that addition be 50% of the footprint. But the truth is that, you know, if we applied rear landscape setbacks and had other provisions, you know, maybe we want a 3-foot landscape zone before you're allowed to have a driveway. You're going to eat away at the remaining area where you can put an addition that you might choose to tear down.
Okay.
So I think this was a hard site to get the
Yeah.
50% footprint without shoving the parking all the way back, saying, well, we can convince, you know, the inspectional services people that we can count the porches as the full frontage. So we really tried to get the thing to fit and max out.
I understand, but if you do the same kind of, make the tear down less attractive by doing something similar, or maybe more of it, I don't know. Maybe that'll help, I don't know the answer.
And it might be true now that we've seen John's analysis that maybe an addition that's half that size still yields more square footage than the new construction. And someone might not then do 6 units because the gross square footage isn't, because it might be a 5-unit project with an addition that's half that size, might still be more attractive than the new construction if we stick with the 1,500 square foot footprint, which only yields 4 small units or 3 slightly bigger ones. So these are all the kind of things that we need to consider as we design this whole code specifically for the MRT, because we have to be careful here. that we get
Yeah,
this right.
I want to make sure that what we end up with is something that we're gonna be happy with,
Right.
and that the neighborhood would be happy with, so.
So what's
And
the
it, and it
perfect
meets
example?
MBTA communities because the
Yeah.
MRT
Right.
is how we get there.
And
Right.
competes with the existing zoning that,
Right.
which most people aren't happy about, but is very economically attractive.
Well,
So
clearly
it's-
the
it's
duplex
tough.
is nothing, I mean, the
You've got to
duplex
get
is
rid of
bad,
the underlying zoning.
yeah.
Yeah, if you put the
Yeah.
duplex issue aside, I do think exploring something less than 50% would be interesting, because if the duplex is out of the question, I think you're gonna see a lot more of these than the new
Okay.
construction.
Even if it was 40% or something like.
Right, you have to run, I haven't run the numbers,
We
but
had just 400 square feet maximum addition footprint
It
earlier
was
on.
not economically feasible.
And it was not, it just. We didn't think that it was enough area to sweeten the deal. So there is an interesting question about, is half the footprint big enough? Or is it smarter to have clear setback rules and
Yeah.
force people to go? I'd rather leave it at 50%, but have more setback rules.
Which would protect the
Which
neighbors.
protect the neighbors.
I like that,
Versus the extraction of having a smaller footprint, which is a little abstract.
I like that.
Because that would be fine if that was on a bigger lot,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
That's the brief that
Right.
I'm putting as these two test fits. I think it's more that we increase the setbacks, especially the rear setbacks.
Yeah, track of this list of things we are wanting to.
Thank you for that.
But yeah, that's very interesting though.
And we are requiring 5-foot landscape strip with trees around parking areas or a wall or fence.
What about driveways?
We don't call out driveways, we just call out parking lots.
Okay, more to look at.
Yeah.
And we should, and I was just asking Jacqueline, we need to keep a list of these things. This is a complicated zone. And we're trying to do a lot with it. I have, Counselor Wright, I imagine you had some more questions than the several you've asked, and then I have, Counselor Lipoff on deck who's in the room, and then I'll go online. I know this is a deep and long conversation, but we'll try to get to everybody.
Okay, so. Let's go. The incentivized conversion, we're maxing out at 6 units. I think for a few handful of lots and houses, I think there could be possibly more than 6 units. Something to think about. I mean, over on Washington Street and Newton Corner, you get some giant houses there, 10,000 square feet already, and a big lot. On your sheet that had MRT and it had a bunch of different bullet points. I think it's confusing, and the first one is potential to produce smaller units at a lower price point, which I like. And then you continue with will help produce affordable units. Affordable, you're already saying a lower price point. I think you should take that affordable out because that's just confusing. Capital A, low A, it just confuses everyone.
Yeah, one cheaper, is that?
Attainable.
Yes.
Attainable.
Less expensive.
Right.
Well, you're already saying a lower price. point.
Attainable or.
Yeah.
Yeah, not too quick.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
gets.
You can just leave it at a lower price point.
Yeah, and just take out that other stuff.
Cheaper and expensive. I thought that was pretty good ad.
Well, yeah, the cheap housing.
Yeah, you don't want to pay cheaper, less expensive, but you just take it out, you're already saying it. And then the next one, you briefly talk about it, but with the new building code, the efficiency, energy efficiency. I don't know if anybody's really building to it. I know you use numbers. Was that really factored into it or not, or?
I mean, I talked to builders about it and they're familiar with it, but I mean, I don't have like a, real detailed analysis of exactly what those costs are gonna be. But yes, they're factoring it into when we're having the discussion.
Okay, so you feel comfortable with those numbers? Okay. And then I have going through the charts, you're only using 50% of the basement. Why are, as you're counting, you have a 1,500 square foot footprint. why only counting 750 square feet of the basement then? And not the full, because we're not doing parking, so you don't have a garage on that first floor, so the parking's elsewhere.
It's a good question. I don't know why we chose that exact number, but I think the assumption is that a portion of it is, developed and saleable. Another portion might have, utilities or storage or something different,
I
but.
think it's just based on our experience that, that. Typically some part of a basement is high enough out of the ground that it can actually have windows, and then it can be used as a third bedroom or something, or some other kind of use, and the rest of the basement has to be embedded in the ground, and that's where mechanical equipment is and those kinds of things. So we thought, just to keep the analysis simple, we wouldn't discount the basement, we wouldn't count the entire basement as usable area. We went like this. That's how scientific it was, but John agreed that that was a good assumption.
I mean, the assumption is that they definitely will want to develop the
Some of the
basements, right?
Yeah.
How much, it's hard to say. I mean, my basement has a portion that there's ledge in it, right? So it's that part you can't touch, right? So I don't know, it's 50% could be a little low, maybe it's 75, I don't know, but I think it's a good idea not to do 100%.
Okay. And we discussed it a little bit more, the usable open space. We only have 30% for lots over 30,000 right now. In MR zone, it's 50%. I would like to see that kind of numbers. And I would like the building footprint of 1,500 instead of the 1,800. So you pick two lots of like 9,000 and what is it? The other one's what? 10,700. But what about, did you look at like lots of 15,000 square feet? And what about lot subdivision?
We
Or
looked
rear
at
lot?
lots that are only in the proposed MRT district.
Yeah,
And so we did a quick scan of those and we picked low, medium and high.
because like Newtonville has some long, sounds getting long.
Yeah, and so I think based on our last conversation too, the intent is to take out the rear lot provision. We just have to figure out how to exactly write it in the text. But that you could still subdivide if you had a wide lot that had frontage.
And what are those parameters? We haven't stated any of those parameters.
No, but it seemed like the feedback in general was to, not encourage those rear lot subdivisions for those long, narrow lots. Like I said, we have to figure out how exactly to write that in so that we are still allowing for subdivision and still allowing for multiple lots. So if you did have a large lot that had frontage, you would likely subdivide it rather than just doing, one building or a conversion. But if you have the long, deep lot, you could do a special permit for additional buildings.
So when are we going to discuss about the subdivision of lots? I think that's a big deal for a lot of people. And I prefer to keep the minimum like lot standards now and not to allow, because the new build can be put on a 3,400 square foot lot.
Right, but if we, let's say for the purposes of this discussion, the biggest building you can do is 1,500 square feet. I mean, the footprint. You're not gonna make a decision to subdivide until you can get two 1,500 square foot buildings, each of which on the subdivided lot would still have to meet the setbacks.
And have, a driveway and some parking.
And have a driveway to park in.
And-
So that precludes except for the very wide lots.
And corner lots.
That'll roughly be with the setbacks for my math, and I don't know if you guys have kind of done similar, is it's gonna be around 3,000 square feet each.
Yes, no,
You really can't, with the setbacks, you really can't.
yeah, no, I did
Depending on the
I
state.
provided, it was like 3,400 without parking, but let's say if you have parking, it's 5,000, especially corner lots, you would be
Right.
easily to do that. So every corner lot could basically subdivide every 10,000 square foot corner lot.
And if we truly want to get smaller units and less expensive units, then I think that's actually not a bad outcome. That we see some smaller lots with 1,500 square foot footprint buildings with 4 units that are going to be smaller units. They're going to be less expensive. As opposed to the alternative where we're seeing large sites that just have one very large home or 2 very large homes on it.
I'm not sure if everyone agrees with that, but this here, and I think planning could do this really quick, is these test cases, do a third column and put what can be built today, you know, and if they were MR1 lot, I don't know, if both of them were SR, but if it was an MR, because a lot of the MRT is an MR lot.
Yeah, I think the Newton Corner one was MR.
That's MR1.
Yeah. Okay, I just got a couple more questions. I didn't understand the math on the Newton Center. With the open space for the new build versus the conversion. So the new build is ideally, you can put whatever you want and we think would have the most open space. But the conversion, which was actually bigger on the footprint and stuff, was actually had a higher open space. So I didn't understand how that math worked.
I can explain that. So the conversion actually has 3 units. And so because we were working under the assumption that the market would provide 1 space per unit that has 3 parking spaces versus the new construction, we were showing 4 parking spaces because we assumed it could go to the maximum 4 unit.
Okay, so it was the parking that was.
Yep.
Was affecting it. Okay, so I wasn't going crazy. Okay, I think, let's see.
Council, right, maybe we could go to some other folks and come back.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
Okay, good. Thank you. Councilor Lipoff, you're next, and then I'm gonna go online, so maybe we can look at folks online even, unless you want to look at a slide. A particular slide.
Yeah, just one, can we go to the slide that has the whole grid all the way to 2 units to the right? Yep, okay. Can you just explain to me, I know that instead of average unit size, that's supposed to be the total building.
Yeah.
So all the way to the right, the underlying zoning duplex, you can do 2. That 13,400, are you saying that that's cut that in half and that's the size of 1 unit?
Yeah, and again, that we don't have a test fit for that, so I could be interpreting, I didn't read all the nuances of the code, so I could be interpreting it wrong, but yes, that's what this would be, 2 very large homes, yeah,
Including the basement though.
correct.
Well, that's including the basement and maybe the garage and other areas and. Because if you're using that number to get to the 7.7 million, is that the total sellout of the 2 units?
Yeah, 575 a square foot.
Okay, that is not what's happening in the
Okay,
market.
so that could be, fair enough, I put that on because I know we need to compare it, and I might have jumped the gun because we don't have an
We
actual
gotta
test
do
fit.
that at the last minute.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because that just throws everything out of whack, because what I'm still trying to do here, you gotta follow the dollar.
Yeah.
Nothing's gonna work if the economics don't work.
Sure,
So that is, you gotta redo this. This is not.
well, so
This is
then,
not accurate to what the market is. So what we do need to look at is the underlying zoning compared to this wonderful stuff we're doing here, which, by the way, engineering the size of these units and not saying we're gonna dictate the size of the units. I see what you're doing. It's wonderful, because that's what we really want to do. And the smaller units to get our middle market real estate in this city is exactly a major goal here. But you know, Zach Lamel and I were doing a little bit of this offline. The 800 per square foot is correct in the 1,000 square foot mark. It changes as you go up and down.
sure, but that's what that's what.
But that's the target. It's great. And once again, we've said this before. If it is more profitable to do the underlying zoning, then everything we're doing here is a pipe dream.
Sure.
And so we've got to find a way where 4 units equals as much or more than what the 2 are. And I love where you're going. I love what you're thinking about. I love what MRT represents. I love the engineering to the mid-market, smaller square footage, which gets us that. But, you know, put my developer hat on, I'm not doing it. And that's when so we gotta keep, I don't know how we get there, but we gotta get there somewhere.
So, are you saying the duplex numbers are
The
too
gross
high
number's too big.
or too low?
They're not selling for 3.35 million right now. They're selling for 1.8 a piece, you know, maybe 2.2 at the best.
So that
It's not
comes down, which then,
Makes the thing work better.
yeah,
Exactly.
okay, so
I've got
that's,
some
that's
numbers
good.
here you've got to
Yeah.
fix, but still, you
So
know,
that helps us.
yeah, I mean, look,
Makes
you
the
got
other
4
options more
units.
attractive.
Let's use simple numbers here. You got 4 units. Times 800,000, you got 3.2 million, right? Those 2 units. Underlying zoning would be 3.6, would be $1.8 million a piece. This is, I do this for a living in my day job. So the numbers don't completely work here.
I think the duplex admittedly is not based, we didn't show the test fit for that, right? So that was me looking at what that would look like. I was thinking that there's basically two single family homes. So if you're telling me they're smaller units, that's fine. We can rework that one. And what that'll do is it'll make the 6-unit conversion look more attractive. But we do want to compare it to the MR. That's the idea.
And you want to look at the 3, the 4, the 6, and you just want to run those numbers and just say to yourself, you know, we've got to make this attractive to the homeowner and to the developer to do the new zoning that we really want here, not just because we want to fit it into a box for the state or anybody else, but to truly get what we're looking at that we want for our neighbors.
Councilor Lipoff, in summary, so that everybody who's listening understands, you're saying that the last column, the far right column, isn't realistic. In fact, it's overstating what the underlying zoning can achieve by a lot.
Yes, and if you ever take the FAR or the total building, that's not how they're bought. They're bought based on livable square footage, first and second floor, no garage. Now, the basement, what's happening in Brookline and Somerville, and we're starting to see it in Newton, is they do use the basement, especially when it's on a hill. Sometimes they dig out around it, and the market is paying for a basement first floor condo. We're not supposed to, as appraisers, include that square footage, but it's changing. It's market driven, and we're doing it now. In Brookline, they're digging it out. You're getting $2 million for the basement first floor and 2.8 for the second and attic third floor. That's what's happening over there. We're behind. It's not that expensive, but we just did some on Newtonville Ave where we included that finished basement space, just to let you know what's going on in the market.
Thank you.
Okay.
When we go back and look at this, we can fine tune those numbers, which should make the conversion more attractive, which maybe then if we do adjust setbacks or things that you can't always max it out, that's still going to be an attractive option.
What I'm gonna say is that this chart, which is in our packet and will be in the report, needs to have a footnote at least until we get the real numbers for the comparison, because that's skewing what we're looking at here by quite a bit. And at least like some language to put in the report and maybe need some help for Jacqueline to do that. Let's see, Councilor Baker had a comment on this
Note on
point.
that. Your comment was made earlier that there's the other docket item relating to the underlying zoning. I do think it's worth keeping that. I don't know what the sequencing is, whether the discussion occurs after this or whether they all are done at the same time, because part of the challenge you're trying to do is incentivize this and question whether you want to keep the underlying zoning if you're going to do all this.
I've thought about that, and I wonder, we have to submit our plan with the zoning adopted before the end of the year. So let's say we vote this at the end of November and we submit it before the holidays to DHCD. They have to approve it. Could we, it's a question, could we make our new zoning effective once we get the subject to DHCD approval? They're gonna need some time to do that, right? And I'm wondering this, because we're thinking about this also with other ordinances like the electrification ordinance. We're trying to put things in place that are related at the same time, or at least a similar time. So we're gonna start conversations on this new docket item, I don't know when, but say in the fall. But there's only so many resources we have for people to work on this, and it is related.
Well,
So,
I guess the irony is that you would, if you went through this process and then you came to the docket item and the building community said, we really like to have the underlying zoning because it's a good deal for us, and then it says, no, thank you. And then you don't get the ability to package the two. And I don't know whether that's desirable or not, I just rest.
well, we're not gonna eliminate the underlying zoning, we're
No.
modifying the metrics.
Metrics, but that's what the docket item is about.
I mean, I think you can probably expect some portion of the building community to not support adjusting the metrics to make sure the building's solid.
Building, if you want the more stuff,
Yeah.
you're gonna give it to you, but you gotta take a little away here.
Yeah.
That makes it a little more saleable.
Yeah, I just think realistically, given, this is over 2 years worth of work to get here. The garage ordinance took us how long?
We're never gonna do that again.
I'd like to think we can address the underlining MR zone quickly, and that's the hope, but I don't want to hold up
This.
our compliance with state law and this, which we think is a big step
We
forward.
can't hold up our clients,
On
and
that.
that's why I wondered about, what, can the effective date be different from the date of adoption?
That's
20 days?
something we can look into.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Where are we now? We need to see people online. We have 3 hands up. Counselor Laredo, Bowman, and Lucas. Please join us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start off with the observation that I think it would be extremely helpful to understand when you do a chart what's currently allowed now, and then what would be allowed under the various scenarios. And part of that is because this is going to be an overlay district, so it's important for us to understand what is currently there. And I'd ask that the next iteration include that. The second question I have for you goes to how you chose these 2 particular properties to analyze.
So,
I can jump in
yeah.
on that one. So just quickly, the MRT district, we looked at different lot sizes. And I think as Tim was saying, we picked kind of things in the average and medium range, a little higher, a little lower. And we wanted to look at different housing types as well. But we wanted to kind of find your more typical conditions when it comes to lot size.
Well, Mr. Lamel, you took 2. So did you start off with 10 or 12 and do the analysis for those and then come down to 2? Or did you just take 2 lots and then do the analysis?
We looked at a bunch and then we came down to 2.
So can we see what else you looked at? Because that would help inform us. 2 seems like a very small number for us to make broad ranging judgments on. So it would be helpful to have 6, 8, 10 that we can see what the differences are.
We looked at all of the lots in the proposed MRT and did GIS analysis to find kind of the size ranges, and then use that kind of analysis, not actual test fits, to pick 2 that fell within the low average and high average. We didn't actually do test fits of any more than the 2 that you saw.
Well, Mr. Lamel said something different just now.
No, I'm sorry if I wasn't clear. I was saying exactly kind of what Tim was saying. We narrowed ourselves down to 6, 8, 10, 12 sites, and then we decided to analyze 2 of them. So we used analysis to get down slowly but surely and analyze 2 of them.
I think it would be helpful my concern is we're drawing very broad conclusions based on literally 2 case studies. And that seems to me extraordinarily dangerous in all aspects, and that we really need to see a broader range of sites because, we may be making judgments on one of the 2 sites and for whatever reason, it's not typical. So I'm just going to ask that. I think it's a legitimate request. It may not have to be as detailed an analysis, but at least some comparison seems to me very helpful.
Can you let someone complete a response to that, please?
So just one more thing there, what really changes here is the conversion option, because we are looking at, the numbers are essentially the same with our 1,500, 1,800 square foot footprints. Since we're not using FAR, so that's not changing with lot size. And the numbers John's assuming are consistent. So the difference would be the conversions, and we tried to find two that were representative of the different conditions out there, a smaller, 1.5 story, and then a larger home that might be more attractive to convert.
Right, but President Albright a few minutes ago talked about your example in Newton Corner, where if you did the conversion and the addition, and I want to go back to that in a moment, you really take up virtually all of the frontage, albeit a step back like 20 feet. I don't know if that's typical or not, but that's the exact type of thing we need to understand. So I'll just reiterate my concern that taking 2 case studies citywide is not a sufficient analysis to understand what we're doing. I've got a few other questions here. When you're doing your analysis of the 3rd floor, these are all what you call 2.5 stories, but are really 3 stories. Of the total square footage, how much of the 3rd floor can be used?
We're counting it as 2/3 of the area. That's our definition for the half story with the pitched roof.
So 2/3 of the 3rd floor is livable then, right?
Right.
The same as our existing code.
Okay, all right. Now, we recently did a project on Clinton Street that we approved in the land use process, Ms. Kyra. And I asked Ms. Weewell at the time, not expecting that she'd have the answer, to understand whether that project as it came in would have been allowable by right or not. And I don't know the answer, but I would suggest that's a good case study for us as well, because the Clinton, I think it was Clinton Place project, and I believe it's in the MRT1, but I could be wrong, was a project for the edification of everyone else. When it came in, I think the consensus was it wasn't a particularly good project before it came to us, but they worked in it with the neighbors. And by the time they came in for the special permit, it really sailed through because it was an excellent project. My point there is, had that been a by right development, you might have gotten a very different result. And I'd urge us to take a look at that. Could you go back to the Newton Corner site that you put up there, please? So, where on this site are you going to park a car?
They're drawn in the drawing in the back.
So where is the driveway?
It's along the edge of the property.
And it's what, 5 feet?
No, it's
10
10.
10 feet. So the house runs directly next to the driveway, and then that's where the line is?
Yeah, there's a little bit of a landscape zone between the yellow massing there and the driveway, but yes,
How much of a landscape zone is that?
3 feet.
All right, so you're going to have 3 feet. You're going to have a driveway there. You're going to have 6 cars in the back. Where's the open space here that anyone would use?
That's the comment that
We had
Counselor.
had this discussion.
yeah, that's the comment that
No one likes it.
I mean, where
Counselor Albright brought up.
We did have this discussion, Council
Yeah,
Laredo.
no one liked it.
No, I'm just saying, if we're talking about building 6 units there, okay, you're gonna park 6 cars above ground in the back, directly behind or next to somebody else's house. You have no area that I can see to put a swing set, a play area, anything, and yet we're hoping to encourage families to live here. So, how is that going to work?
Can I respond to that? I think the city overall is, Newton's an incredibly green city and has access to an incredible park space, particularly in areas near our village centers. And so, just off this map is some of the city's best open space available to it. So I think there is some small space that would be available on site, but I think when we're talking about our village centers, the resources and what makes Newton such an amazing city is its green space and the parks that, particularly in this area, but really all of our village centers are available, to any family who moves in here. I think any family would love to be a block away from some of the green space that's in Newton Corner and any of Newton's village centers.
Mr. Lamel, that's your value statement. I think it's really important that rather than imposing your personal value statement, you go tell the people you're designing this for that there will not be any open space for 6 units to use.
These are policy questions that we did bring up before, but Director Heath would like to make a comment on this point.
Just getting back to the whole trade-off issue. If a family can get a unit for $800,000, they could probably live with the fact that they can't fit a playground in their backyard. It's trade-offs. It's the number of units you can fit on a lot that provides more attainable housing versus what you have now, which is not attainable. That's the essential question here.
You're forgetting something, and I'm just going to put it out there. All the conversation we have out there, or much of it, is not just housing per se, but the dearth of single-family housing for folks who want it. None of this is going to be that. You're addressing a different need and desire, not necessarily wrong, but we just can't avoid that. And I am concerned about. I think the idea here that you're squeezing a tremendous amount onto this particular site with very little true open space, I think is concerning. And I stand by that. And can I just ask one other question, please?
This is not a real project.
Are you going to be doing a 3D modeling of this?
Councilor Widow,
That's what we're showing on the screen.
that is what this is.
If I can.
I'm sorry, I'm asking Ms. Kyra.
Yeah.
Is this your 3D model?
Of this particular test fit, yes.
Okay, and there'll be nothing other than this one.
For this test fit, at this moment, this is what we have.
Could you do a 3D model showing what this entire street would look like if it was built out in the same way so we can see that?
So we're taking case studies here. We're not doing, and I know this has come up before, and there's a great interest in a 3D model of the whole city. We're not doing 3D modeling of the whole city. I think Tim and Lauren can jump in as well, that there's a incredibly high cost. We don't expect to see a full street, all take advantage of this, all turnover. Some of these sites may be bigger than what we're allowing. They may have more units than what we're allowing. The embedded value may be too high. The owners may not be interested. As you pointed out earlier, there still is a desire for single family homes. And many people would like to stay in their single family home. Not all of them are going to turn over to this.
Ms. Kyra, I appreciate that observation.
Please allow Ms. Kyra to finish a sentence.
Ms. Kyra, go ahead. I'm sorry. Did you finish?
Not quite.
Go ahead, please. I'm sorry.
What we're trying to do here is provide alternatives. I think it's also a value statement that everyone wants a single family home with space for a yard and a playground. As Director He said, that's just not attainable for everyone. You're not building new single family homes that are attainable for most families in Newton or anywhere else in the region. So what we're trying to do is provide other options. We're looking at 3.4% of the city. Newton is still going to be largely single family homes with this zoning. But we're trying to provide some places where you could get other options. For many families, they'll be thrilled to live in Newton and have a unit that is more in their price range, even if it doesn't come with their own personal backyard. As Mr. Lamel said, there's lots of resources in the city that, for many people, that's more desirable, that they have a unit, they don't have a lot of their own open space or upkeep, but there's a park down the street. So this is about options. It's not about getting rid of single family homes. It's not about trying to pretend you can build new affordable single family homes today. It's about providing a diversity of housing.
Okay, that's a very fair and valid point, and I'm glad we're being crystal clear about it. Good or bad or indifferent, that's what we're building here. But I stand by my request. I agree, doing a global modeling of every house that could be built is not feasible. But to make the statement or the assumption that we only need to look at one, but we don't need to look at 3 or 4, one next to one another, because that's just not going to happen, I don't think is appropriate. And I don't think it's fair. And I don't think it gives us a good representation so we can do a proper analysis. So if you're going to take this particular house, I think it's certainly appropriate to go to either way, build them all out and see what that looks like. We may be fine with that result. But unless we know what that looks like, we can't make the judgment. And I don't think there's any factual basis whatsoever to say, well, we don't have to worry about it because it's not going to be done, or it's speculative. The whole idea of this exercise is we actually want to do this. That's why we're spending so much time on it. So if we want to do it, we're incentivizing developers to do it. We should expect that they're going to do it. Maybe not tomorrow, but not over 20 years. So I'm going to urge that before you come back here with this, that we see a better modeling so we understand what we're getting. And I think then, Councilor Albright, President Albright's concerned about what this looks like. We can at least discuss. And if the consensus is we do it this way, great. That's the consensus. But I think it's really important to be upfront and honest about what we're doing. I'll leave it for now. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Councilor Laredo, I have a couple of comments on this point. One is Councilor Leary and Councilor Leary.
This is my ward, and Councilor Laredo, this is my own personal value statement. I do think that your tone is a bit hostile here. And I would also say that the planning department is working very hard on this. I don't think it's realistic for them to come forward with multiple models for one meeting. I see this as an example, and doesn't mean that we're not going to explore other components of this either. And this is also, as the point was made by Ms. Kyra, that we're looking to expand multifamily housing here in a city that has a huge amount of single family and very expensive homes. And this is an area where we're looking at our Underwood School closing because we can't afford to have young people with children to live here. And I would say that the worst thing is overcrowded schools we can manage, but when we close a school, it just totally destroys the neighborhood. And I think you and I agree about that. Farlow Park, one of the most beautiful parks, and the Underwood School Park is literally across the street from this place. And yes, I would like to consider other examples as well. And you might have missed the conversation where I think there was consensus that no one really liked this, but we have to look at things on both ends of it. And I think by exploring this one, we've decided, well, we need to work harder on this. At least that's what I got out of this.
Right.
And I can't say that, I don't think we should throw blame that they're not doing enough work. I think they're doing as best they can. And I always think that people do the best they can under these circumstances and working very hard. Yes, I would like to see other models as well. But I don't want to be working on zoning for the next 5 years either. I would like to get this done. But I am committed to this idea that we need to look at alternatives to large single family homes and how can we attract young families to Newton Corner and the rest of the city.
Thank you, Councilor Leary. Councilor Baker has a comment on this point as well.
Well, to be fair to Councilor Laredo, I think he echoed what I just asked earlier, which is to understand the implication of the design multiplied over several lots adjacent to each other. Because that's really what we're trying to figure out. One of is an example here, but if you took several houses in a row, and then I think it will give us a way of understanding the impact collectively of this. It's not taking the whole city, but this is, I thought, President Albright's question, which is what happens next door and how does it fit and how does it work and what do we adjust in order to make sure that if it is the conversion that's exercised in multiple cases, that it works, right? Because we don't want to be in a situation that said, well, we know that it worked in one place, but we don't know how it works in the system. Granted that you can't model everything, but I think enough of a context model would help. That's all.
Thank you. And
May I respond just very briefly, Madam Chair?
hold on, just a minute, Counselor Albright has a comment on the same point.
I just wanted to add, because I've been looking at this little district for a while, and I don't think that you could do this on all the lots
No.
on the street. There's
No.
maybe one or two other lots where you could do it. The rest isn't, it isn't possible. So I don't think the idea of doing it on every house on the
It's not
street
really-
is not even
Possible.
in the realm of possibilities.
Well, that's a useful piece of information himself.
Yeah.
I mean, if you just said, look, this, as far as we can tell, this overlay will be literally available while the district is big. Operationally, now, I don't know whether you really want to know all of that if you're going to the state and saying, we've got all the housing opportunity. I don't think it'd be disingenuous, but you got to.
President Albright, that's exactly my point here, and that's why if this is the only one you're doing and the other four, it's not viable, that, as Councilor Baker said, is a very important piece of information. But we don't know that. And as far as Councilor Leary, I'm not for a moment disagreeing that we should be building more multifamily housing. I think that's a good idea. I just want to be very clear to the public what we're doing here. That's all. And that we're not adding to our single family housing stock, we're adding to our multifamily housing stock. It's a good
First
thing.
of all, the members of the committee would appreciate if you didn't interrupt people. So you did just interrupt Counselor Baker, who was not quite finished. And second of all, I don't appreciate that you are insinuating that we are not being very clear to the public. I believe at every meeting, we are getting into the details of whatever piece of the zoning is before us and attempting, at least to the best of all of our ability, we're understanding it. We're working to understand and looking how we need to modify something or not. And we are being as clear as we possibly can. And once we get to the final product, which we're very close to go to public hearing, we will be as clear as we possibly can as to, what these rules could enable. And that's really what it is. What could these rules enable? It's not a design project. It's not we're not looking at it at a particular site in order to see what we would design. We're just looking at massing to see what's possible. And then maybe we don't like it. So as we just, said earlier in the meeting, you were online, but I don't know if you heard this, we talked about requiring screening and and further setbacks and measuring to a different part of the building. So this is what we're doing here, and it's not helpful to criticize. I don't appreciate you're criticizing how we're proceeding, because we are all individually and collectively trying to get to a clear understanding of what we need to do. So I have two more people wanting to speak online. Is there somebody else in the room? Oh, on the same point, okay, Councilor Danberg, and then right on the same point.
Okay. One thing that I'd like to add to this, I would like to say that I agree with everything that Councilor Crossley has said and what some of the other people have brought out. And I'd also like to say, I think feel obligated to say that we in committee work need to be mindful of allowing our colleagues to have enough time to speak and not interrupting them as you've done tonight. And I also think that we need to be mindful of not attempting to take up all the air and all the airtime in the room. If you have spoken, then give someone else an opportunity. And I'm speaking to everyone, including myself. Give someone else the opportunity to speak and don't use up all the air in the room. One of the things that I would like to mention here is that we are now 36 years into this zoning code. We last looked at it in 1987, and before that in the 1950s. And to say that or to even suggest that we're not doing a complete model of what every lot would look like under this under this new zoning code is disingenuous in just the idea of it, because we would have to think about, what would this look like 36 years from now? If we're going to be realistic about it. So I think for, the idea of creating a model that would show what a full build out of the zoning plan would be, we just shouldn't look at it at all because it's not real. And the other thing that I'd like to say is that in talking about single family homes, we need to remember that any of these communities inside 128 are getting so expensive now with their land values that small single family homes for starter homes and young families are not attainable anymore, and they will never be attainable again. We have to look at another model of how we can, as Mr. Heath mentioned and Ms. Kyra, that will allow a family to achieve living in Newton, bringing the children that can no longer afford to live here and endangering our schools of having to close. We have to find another model, and this is one way of providing a model where, as was said, there may not be the opportunity for every backyard to have a swing set and a play area, but you can live in Newton, you can bring your family to Newton, you can afford to bring your kids here, you can afford to buy property here. And the new reality is that we're not going to have single family homes with backyards that are large enough to put swing sets in where the children can play. That's yesterday. We need to look at tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And I have this. Phew, okay, Councilor Wright is next, and I know Councilor Baker has something else to say.
So first, one of the reasons why I'm coming into the room is it's hard on Zoom and responding, and you don't hear other people talking. So, some people are saying he's, Councilor Laredo is, talking over other people. When you're on Zoom, you can't tell that if you're talking, because I did it many times and I got scolded too. And the next thing is, we're trying to get this clear, but counselors are confused, and everything I hear from residents, I have yet to find a resident that actually understands this completely. So this is confusing. I think it would be helpful, modeling a couple of adjacent properties and to see what that is like in the different zones, VC3s, VC2, VC1, and also, the MRT zones. And another item, so my understanding, this is going to be 2 votes because we can only do a simple majority for all residential. And if we're requiring commercial, we do 2/3 vote.
So we're still working through that with the law department, and based on the state's guidance. So I believe my understanding is the allowing for fully commercial buildings would require a separate vote. If we required residential in all buildings, it could all be a simple majority, even if we're requiring mixed use. But allowing for fully commercial uses may require a second vote.
But okay, so then
the
in our
housing-
zoning.
Yeah, the housing choice, it's a little confusing because it all comes from the same statute, right? But the voting threshold is separate and apart from the MBTA community's requirements.
So is our zoning then going to state that it's required to have residential in our priority streets? Because we talked about having an office building or a couple
Yeah.
floors of it. So which right now we're not saying where you're required to have at least 1 floor residential. But it sounds like if you want the whole thing as a simple majority, we would have to state that in the zoning.
Yeah, that hasn't been our intention, that we could, I think and again, this is something I think we can come back with because it still needs more further review with the law department. But I think it would it's more about the use table and where we allow for purely commercial buildings may need its own vote. But I think we want to allow that flexibility. We want to allow for office buildings and commercial buildings. So it may need to be separated into 2 votes.
And then one other clarification, the MRT, the way I read it, the MRT would not allow townhouses side by side.
So if you could fit it in the footprint, you could, but it's not specifically set up for townhouses, because what we generally see are the single family attached, right? When you have the deep lot and it's the townhouses going back. I don't think we're prohibiting townhouses, but you'd have to be able to
It's
make
not
it
in
work.
the use table. You did not allow it in the use table.
We wouldn't
not
wouldn't
permitted.
consider it a different use. It's still.
The 2-family detached, which I thought are townhouses, they're not allowed.
That's the duplex.
Okay.
So we're not allowing single or 2-family because we want to see 3 and up.
I think that it's a good question though, which is in 1,500 square feet footprint, could that be interpreted as 3 or 4 townhouses? And we should just play that out and see.
You could put 3. I mean, 3 would easily fit. in that.
I'm gonna say there's 2 people waiting online and we're not staying on the same topic that we went around the room.
And we have another item still.
We do have another item. Councilor Baker, do you have something on the previous
Yeah,
item?
let me just point out, I think, I understand, I'd like to say a word for the farmers, so to speak, as they said in Oklahoma. Part of the challenge of our process is that we really want everyone, as much as possible, to be clear about what we're doing and we ourselves. I think that's the shared objective. So I think there is some value, and we discussed this, in having some context analysis by the planning department and not rely just on these simple examples as much as they are to get us started. So that we can say, all right, the next iteration, we want to see the simple example plus context, because that's going to make it a lot easier to explain to the public. If you don't do that, then we're going to have people make their own context analysis, and then we're going to be back in a conversation about whether it's accurate or not. So I do think there is some value in that, and I hope Councilor Arredo has understood is asking for clarity, he's not, there are times when we all get a little grumpy at each other being clear. So I don't mean to say that's not normal in this business, but I do think what
You
we're trying.
apologize.
But occasionally, it's just the point is we're just trying to be as clear as we can with everybody so we know what we're buying. That's all.
Got it. And Director Heat.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor this, but that assumes what we have is preferable to this, right? So in order to evaluate what the model looks like, you'd want to do the same thing for the other side, which is under current zoning, what could we possibly get? And that's a model too that you could look at, right? That has the same probability of this. So where does it end? How many different models do you create?
The argument that it could go on ad infinitum doesn't mean it can't go on for a little. So let's
But
pause
should
on
we
that.
show a 5,000 square foot single family home as a comparison?
No. Please don't misunderstand me. I think we're just saying, if you took this simple example here and you said, if we were to apply this same zoning to the adjacent parcel, adjacent, one of them could be developed, one of them could not. One of them could be, looks like this, one could look like that. That's all we're just trying to understand. It's not a
But you
big.
got to compare it against what you have today.
Okay, I think the point has been made. If we're gonna do a full build out for any number of lots on the street and pretend that that is what it's going to look like, because that's what's gonna happen when you put it out into then you have to look at what we could create today.
I understand that.
Okay, so
I'm
that's.
not trying, and you've got the existing situation that people look at, and then the planning department quite properly said, you got to understand what you could build today as of right, right? Okay, and then we're comparing it against what you could build as of right under this new model. That's
Okay.
part of what we're doing, that's
It's
all,
the added item we're trying to get away from.
yeah.
I'm gonna go.
One quick statement, because
Yeah.
we want to go online,
Yeah.
so just very quickly, Pam, we got 4 people up there waiting. I really believe that we have to come to this process in absolute trust in each other. Trust in you guys as the experts who do this 8 hours a day. We don't, okay? And when I hear from you that you looked at a bunch and you took a medium low, medium high, I'm right there with you. We can't do it all over the city. We can't do it for everything. That's the way it works. That's the way you test it. When we talk about taking the street, at first I said to myself, hey, great idea. Let's take a street. Half of those, because of the way those homes are designed, we probably can't even do anything to them. But then Barney makes a good point here. Well, let's look at the underlying zoning, and maybe some of those would get the underlying and then the other ones would get that. What would that look like? The reason why they're not doing that kind of analysis is there are too many what ifs and variables to build that out with a straight face. So I get that, and I trust the process, and I trust you guys. And if we all started that way, I think we'd all have a little bit more fun doing this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilor Lippert. We do need to remember to have fun. I'm going to 2 people online who have been waiting a really long time.
Okay, I'd like to come back to this after
And
this.
we do have another item. So Councilor Bowman and then Lucas. We all.
Thank you.
Right, to talk about, we need to talk about beer at least, right? We need to get a beer. All right.
That should be a fast one.
Councilor Bowman.
So thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to agree with everybody who expressed concern about whether this new MRT zoning will be chosen over the current zoning. I had the experience yesterday of standing out at Newton Highlands Village Day for 5 hours talking to, and I didn't talk to a single resident that I had ever talked to before, and most wanted to talk to me about zoning. And I happened to be standing across from 6971 Lincoln Street. So this is a property immediately adjacent to the commercial buildings in Newton Highlands. It has just been redeveloped with 2 5,800 square foot attached to family. It goes the full extent of the lot side to side. I can't quite tell front to back, but there's 7.5 feet on each side. And this is the type of property that people get frustrated because when they talk about wanting, I talked to families who wanted their brother to be able to, move closer than Billerica, and they want their brother to be able to live in Newton. And, he and his fiance can't find anything that they can afford here. And they look at that and say, why isn't that 4 units or 6 units or 8 units? It's right next door to the post office and the pizza shop. Like, this should be a place where we have more units. So I look at that and say, we need to design this MRT so it actually creates 4 and 6 units of housing. And I just, on this analysis here, I'm still not convinced, and I am a numbers gal. I don't see it. Let's not underestimate the impact of fire code. I'm on land use, and anything that we've seen that's 4 units or more, and I don't know if it's just because of the overall built or the number of 4 units, the fire department has been requiring 18-foot driveways. If they have to pull onto the property to get to
18 wide driveways. That's nuts.
Yeah, so we can talk about that. So just, you should confirm that number of 10 feet. I love 10 feet. I think 10 feet's great. We just permitted 4 units, and I tried to get them to shrink the driveway. They shrunk it from 20 to 18. That's all the fire department would allow them to come down. I think when we think about things, Councilor Rado spoke about wanting to create more single family homes, and I don't know, unless we want to start chopping some lots in half and doing that. I think one way we can create more available single family homes to be purchased is by creating housing that allows people to downsize. And we have is another group of people I spoke to yesterday, seniors who live in Newton Highlands in big homes who want to be able to downsize, just like my in-laws did in 2016, which is how I became a housing advocate. And there was no place for them to move where they could walk, where that it was accessible, they could get a cup of coffee, get something to eat, have at least some access to some food, even if they didn't live right by a grocery store. That's something where we have an opportunity maybe in some of these 6 units to make some of these more accessible. Land use has been successful in getting accessibility built into some of our projects that are even as small as 4 units, getting the developer to build 1 or 2 of them to be universal design. So I think we have opportunities here. This is an opportunity that could create access to more single family homes. I think those are, the biggest elements. And I do think that it is seemingly, if we want to maintain the example that you used on Center Street, with the small Cape style house, it does seem a little unfair for them. And we probably have lots of situations where we have a small Cape or ranch style house on a medium-sized lot or a bigger lot, and they're going to be held back if they try to keep that house because the house is small to begin with. So I feel like we need to have some more conversations about that. I get wanting to encourage some of these homes to be kept, but we also don't want to miss. And then I guess I still feel like this definition in MRT, I feel like we need to have a better option when we have those larger lots or even the long, thin lots. Would 145 Warren get built under this scenario? Would, these types of projects, because that's a good project and that's a good use of that space. But if the MRT zoning wouldn't have allowed that, then that's a problem. And that street that has several properties on it that are just like it, long in there, big 25,000 square foot, 22,000 square foot lots, where you could have an opportunity to build 6 or 8 units on that quite nicely. And it would be nice to understand how that would get done. So that's what I have to say. And I have one other question. I keep seeing the reference to 47 feet high in this zone with the 2.5 stories. So maybe you could explain how it's not 36 feet. Like what's 40? Do you really expect a 2.5 story building to be 47 feet high?
Yeah, and I think the test fits that we did showed, or was it like 30? Yeah, if you go back, so this is showing 35. The 47, I think, actually can be reduced. It was the ground floor is a bit of a holdover from when we were assuming some commercial might be allowed on the ground floor.
That's the old VC.
I mean, and I don't have a problem with it 47. I mean, maybe I do in this area. I just wanted to understand like where that came from. But I think if it's going to be in this area and we expect them to fit in next to other current residential homes, the 47 feet is going to be problematic.
Yeah.
So, and where I would like to see 47 feet or more is I do think that VC1 section on Route 9 is too short. I think you need to rethink that. But that's a conversation for another day. But I do appreciate all the effort that goes into this and trying to help us make these decisions. I know it's very complicated. But I will tell people, my fellow counselors, I spoke to many people yesterday that I have never seen on Zoom that are very knowledgeable about this, who have been following along. And they're asking for more options for the most part. They're asking for equity between the village centers. They're asking to understand how this impacts them. But, they weren't, and prefer, if we're going to have more density, for it to be located in the village centers as opposed to, further away. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bowman. And I just do want to put on the table again, we are trying to keep track of all of the modifications that as they're raised. And I think we did at one point, is it this meeting or another, I'm kind of melding them together to talk about the possibility of reducing story height in the residential districts. We've been advised all along that nobody's going to build 12-foot high floor to floor, and especially in MRT for residential, but maybe not anywhere because it just costs more money and doesn't give you anything desirable. and that ground floor can be reduced as well. But the 47 feet is to the ridge of the highest roof,
Right.
the highest ridge of the top roof.
Considers an 18-foot story pitched.
Right, and the flat roofed building is much less. And only, well, you can't have a. flat
Only
roof.
2 stories, flat roof. in
If
MRT.
it's just 2 stories, yeah, flat roof, yeah. But thank you so much, and I think I'm looking again at a picture, but I believe Tariq Lucas was next.
Am I up?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand it's late, so I will try my absolute best to be brief. I was looking in the agenda and there was a rendering, 4 renderings of MRT, VC1, VC2, VC3 with the basic dimensions for each district. And I was just wondering, the MRT, oh, are you bringing it up?
Yeah.
There you go. Yep, this is the one. The MRT in the top left. Is this the only rendering from the street view that we have on file?
Yeah, it's the only full rendering. We have this sort of block test fits, and we've been looking at lots of images of existing buildings that would fit either the new construction size that give an idea of what that looks like, or are examples of existing conversions.
Okay. Oh, go on.
I was gonna say, there's a slide with some existing homes in this package of, in this presentation as well, but in previous presentations, we've seen quite a few slides of existing homes at relative footprints that would fit in this zone.
Okay, I know you had already, this was on my list of questions, so I'll just ask it. I think I have an idea of what the answer is gonna be. But it would be helpful if we could see the MRT abutting the VC3, just to put it to scale. I think that would be helpful, but I understand that was addressed earlier in the night when it comes to renderings and scenarios, so I don't think I'm gonna see that, but would be helpful for people to see, especially those who live potentially next to a VC3 and a MRT zone. Would be helpful. The other thing which had me puzzled when I was reading the agenda over the weekend is right here in the MRT zone, and I guess it maybe applies for VC1. It says it's a 45 feet tall max, and it says right there it's residential development allowed, so there's no commercial. It's residential only, and it's 45 feet. It could be 45 feet high. Seems like you're 9 feet too high on that, simply because it's residential only, and I don't know why you need 15 feet per floor. So if someone could please explain that.
Councilor Lucas, we just a moment ago had that conversation with Councilor Bowman and talked about what constitutes the 45 foot tall. I actually thought it was 47, but whatever it is, it's up to the peak of the main roof. And we talked about how we can bring that height down because we have a story height for the main floors that's higher than would ever get built. Cut it back to 11 feet from 12, and a story height on the first floor. That's a holdover. The VC1 with commercial opportunities. So we just had that conversation just before you came on.
Okay, I didn't understand if that's what you were saying. But again, it seems very, very high. I would like to see it lowered. I mean, in our residential districts, I believe it's 36 feet in an R or SR zone. But
We agree, yeah.
Everybody agrees.
Yeah, we did have that conversation. So
I can't, there's too many people talk. I don't know what you're saying.
we're all agreeing with you. We had that conversation just now.
Okay. That is all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lucas. Counselor Loretta, your hand is still up. Are you wanting to?
I'll be extraordinarily brief. First of all, my apologies for interrupting anyone. It is, as Councilor Lucas just said, very difficult sometimes to understand when you're looking online as to who's done speaking or not. So my apologies for that. I certainly did not intend to interrupt anybody. Second, I want to be clear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be doing this work. I just want to be clear. I know this group knows it, but the general public may not know as much as to what we're doing, what we're building, and why. And I think we need to be crystal clear about that. Third, I'm going to reiterate what I asked for earlier about some kind of analysis of a nearby property or two along with the particular property. I'm not asking for a full-scale build out of the entire area, but to simply say there are too many variables, we don't know if it's going to get built or not. That just doesn't help us a lot to analyze whether something is good, bad, or indifferent. I'd really urge us to do that. I trust that's not too much work, even to do a back of the envelope so we can generally see what 3 or 4 buildings that are built out along a row might look like. Because as Councilor Baker said, it's not just the first one, it's the second and third and fourth that you need to be thinking about. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Counselor Laredo. Counselor Wright, we do have
I know.
another item.
2 things real quick. Going back to talking about what can be built now versus what's the proposed. So today we have setbacks, we're using the same setbacks, but FAR controls the size of the house usually. And most of the houses, if it was just a setback, they don't build out to the extreme, and FAR is controlling it. We're getting rid of FAR and we're adding 50%. So we're going to have can have much bigger buildings on the lot. So the thought is maybe we need to increase some of the setbacks in those cases. And the second thing, which I requested, and I was a number of times, and I was wondering when the planning department will be able to provide the total number of units that are being proposed by right. Originally was the 10,000 for only 5 villages and doesn't include priority streets. And so I'd like to get that number with the additional 7 villages and the priority streets included.
So I think we've talked about that before in this committee. That number is not a realistic number. It doesn't make sense to take the state's model and apply it to areas that's not included in our submission for MBTA communities. We did that math to show that we will come into compliance with state law, but that 10,000 already assumes every single lot is cleared and is a blank slate, and the maximum number of housing units are built on it with 0 parking spaces. So none of these numbers are helpful. It's not useful to us at all because it's not a real number by any stretch of the imagination. And as we talked about here, and what Tim and Lauren have weighed in on as well, is there are so many variables that you cannot get anything that is a useful number when we're looking at this size. There's over 1,000 different property owners. There are so many decisions and factors that go into it that number is just not helpful.
So the thing is, I'm sorry, I'm taking more time on this, but that number didn't include other things, and that was including 1,000 square feet. And if they do smaller units, it'd be more, and the additional for affordability. So we've done numbers for like the Washington Street Vision Plan, and you've come up with, this is what the proposal will provide. So I don't understand why we can do it for other things. Why can't we do it for this?
Once you start looking at larger and larger areas, those numbers are less and less reliable. If you're looking at a small area, you can go through and look at individual sites and have a sense of what might get developed based on what's existing. As you grow and get bigger, that math just gets fuzzier and fuzzier.
So to rezone all our villages in the entire city here, and yes, I know it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a step function where it's going to happen quickly, a big jump at the beginning and then slowly, gradually go on. It affects everything in the city. And I think we can't just zone it without looking at the consequences and seeing that we can, this was supported.
Yeah, and I think we have been looking at that, and we are getting off topic for MRT analysis. I want to make sure we have time to get to the craft brewing.
Me too.
But we've looked at existing examples of multifamily and the increase in tax revenue. That helps pay for your city services. We've looked at the number of students that are coming out of multifamily buildings, and it's not many. As Councilor Leary stated earlier, our issue is more the opposite. Are we going to have enough students to sustain the existing schools? We're locating housing in areas where the infrastructure exists. Unlike when we were talking about maybe putting housing on golf courses where we don't have the roads, the water, the sewer, all of those things, all of that infrastructure exists where we're looking to prioritize housing. We're putting housing near the T and smaller units, so it's reducing the number of vehicular trips. We need to provide this housing for so many reasons, and if we're going to, these are the spots to do it. We also see from concept to reality, these projects take a long time, even if you take out the special permit. From when you're developing plans, you're getting financing, you're getting building permits, you're constructing, and then you're occupying, it's years. That gives us time to be coordinating closely with the school department, with any other city departments, to make sure that the city can handle any new residents that are coming. Again, we can get into some of this more next week for the benefit of the full council. I do want to make sure we can move on to the other item, but
Because we did say we were going to focus on this one area, which is relatively newer material for us, but I appreciate that. Thank you. And hold on. Yes, we have a motion to hold from Councilor Leary, but President Albright has a.
More than for the 20th, when you make the presentation. I was at Newton Highlands Day for a while yesterday as well. There are a lot of people who are scared to death of the 10,000 number. They don't understand that it is a made up number. And it has to do with the fact that we're not requiring any parking, and therefore we get the full number of space.
every single site develops. And it's
Zero parking.
and people, I think, are assuming we're adding, right? There's existing housing in these areas already. It's
So
not-
please explain that.
And if we want to scare our residents, we can throw around that number.
That's right.
Instead, we should be explaining to them what that number really
Yes,
is.
so thank you for doing that next week.
And we should be explaining what the zoning really is about and remembering the goals we all agreed are primary for us. So we have a motion to thank you, everyone. We're getting there. And sometimes it's painful, but it's really interesting when you think this multidimensional problem. And so it has so many dimensions to it, and we're actually moving forward. So thank you all for that. Motion to hold this item. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you so much. With that, you Teal and Landwise, you do not need to remain with us to talk about your year. Council,
I really should have tried. If we were allowed to, I have to go get some licensing.
I think we're not.
But I'm not, you know, a method actor. I'm a method counselor, and I've been just for this.
All right then. All right. Thank
Just
you
kidding,
so
I have
much,
not.
everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we will see you on the 20th, or we'll see you on the 26th. Some number of you anyway. Yes, great.
Thank you.
Next item
Do you want to go
is-
drink one down, get it done?
Let's go down.
Okay, we'll do that first. We'll jump to, I'll do them by commission. We have two reappointments to the Newtonville Historic District Commission by Your Honor the Mayor. Item 16723 is reappointment of John Martin. Item 168-23 is reappointment of Jim Gross. Both are to expire on January 1st, 2026. Thank you. We have a motion to approve. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All, any opposed, abstentions? Thank you. The next three are to the zoning board of appeals, item 169-23, 170-23, 171-23. Reappointment by her honor the mayor of Michael Rossi, Jennifer Pucci, and Stuart Snyder to the zoning board of appeals. With terms to expire in April of, I'm sorry, 169-23 and 171-23 to expire April 30th, 2026. And Jennifer Pucci, 170-23, for some reason, oh, there we go, April 19th, 2024. Motion to approve from Councilor Danberg. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you very much. And now we have 3 reappointments to the Newton Affordable Housing Trust. Item 172-23 is and all by the on her honor the mayor, Tamarashi Gambiza. For a term of office to expire May 2nd, 2025. 173-23 is Ann Houston for a term of office to expire on May 2nd, 2026. And 187-23, Peter Sargent for a term to expire May 2nd, 2025. Remember, we had staggered terms. Motion to approve. So moved by President Albright. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed or abstentions? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And now, Councilor Bob. Yes. We have item. Oh, there we go. 206-23, which is Councilor Lipoff. Requesting a discussion and possible ordinance to allow for breweries, brew pubs, and other craft beverage production. The objective of this evening is to introduce this item and where it belongs, and we will be going from there. We will probably need a couple of meetings.
Yes, maybe one more. We did meet, Joe, Barney, a few of us met, to work on this. So we do have, some ideas, that we'd like to pass by and work with the committee. You want to take us through?
Sure. So currently where we're at right now is we have a use on the ordinance that's been around as long as the ordinance has been there, and that is for bottling works. And that specifically does not allow us to do bottling of alcoholic beverages. So we don't have anything on the books that says that we cannot brew or distill, otherwise make alcoholic beverages. But if you're a prospective brewer, you would much rather locate in Cambridge, where you have that explicit permission, Somerville, Waltham, Boston, Woburn, Nord, Canton, any of these other surrounding towns. Needham is working on this as well.
They just passed it.
They passed it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna have to look at the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I need them.
our reasons for wanting to do this, increase our commercial uses and therefore tax base. The social benefits of having another use, another gathering place, hosting clubs, different economic activities out of these kind of spaces. And then the economic benefits, which the Economic Development Council and John Season has been very helpful in helping promote for us. And with that, there's kind of the zoning side of it as well, which is we can make decisions about what kind of alcohol or non-alcoholic craft beverages would be produced, where it goes, as well as some of the other types of issues that we see on the books with trying to comply with Massachusetts state law. It's going to have to be a restaurant. It's going to have to serve food. If you serve those beverages in person, restaurants also don't allow you to take away containerized beverages of alcohol. You're not allowed to do that kind of bottling work. And that goes for retail as well. And then there's also the manufacturing spaces that are maybe not ready for something like this because you have all that square footage to produce, but you can't act as a restaurant or retail in those spaces. And then finally, there's kind of the options that we have to deal with it. These books there. which is the first, you add explicit permission for the restaurants and retail to do this. So the pros, that's easy, existing restaurants, existing retail get to do this. You can add the growlers, taps if you have that existing space. You can bottle, you can do it however you want. The cons on that is that it becomes difficult to separate if there's areas where the council sees we want restaurants, but we don't want breweries. We want retail, but we don't want tap rooms or uses like that. Then there's a use that's independent on its own. That's pros of that is that it's easy to write. It's easy for us to ship where it is. It's easier for us to shift and amend as possible. But the cons are that we probably need to deliberate a little bit more about how we differentiate retail and restaurants versus those uses. And that's about all I have. Do you have anything else, Counselor?
If I know some of us here have been to breweries, small and large. It's a little hobby of mine. You can go as far out as Charlton, Mass to check out Treehouse, which I would tell you, even if you don't like beer, go do it. It's the most unbelievable facility.
It's rated top in the country all the time.
It's the #1 brewery rated in the country 5 years running, and we're very fortunate to have it here. It's amazing. They don't sell in stores. You've got to go out there and pick it up yourself. And they sell, it's an amazing product. They have a tap room, they have food. It's great. Now in Newton, more like what goes on in Woburn at Lord Hobo or Waltham with Mighty Squirrel, it's a smaller space. They do brew on site. It's not as large of a facility. You can buy and take it away. You can have it there. And with food, it's an amazing gathering space. One of the main groups of people who love to go to these spaces are parents with newborns, because there's
Full.
it's
You can take your baby to a bar.
it's amazing, and the parents just need to get out, and they're sleep deprived, and the kids are in the strollers, and they're having it's really a great communal thing. And we just need to figure out how to do it. The reason why we have this bottling problem is because Newton didn't want Coca-Cola bottling plant, in the middle of a retail spot with trucks coming and going. We can do this, and I also want to be mindful that, let's say, on Union Street, with that space now, that could be a brewery. They probably couldn't produce a lot there, and sometimes they produce somewhere else and have a retail location like that. But we do have some industrial areas that could have larger buildings where you could produce more and have spaces like that for gathering. So that's my thought on this. Everywhere around us, they're doing it. They've been highly successful, great for the tax base, great for the community.
Aye. Councilor Baker and then Deborah.
So I appreciate a lot that's gone into this. I do think when I think of bottling, I think of Needham as the Coca-Cola bottling plant.
Right, that's what we want.
That I understand, but there is a scalar question that's built into this, and it seems to me that one of the if you're asking for guidance in a sense, because we're trying to sort this out. What you described as a positive thing in Charlemont is probably a little bigger than we would want to see in Newton, perhaps, maybe not.
We couldn't do it here.
Yeah, I could do it.
Yeah.
So the question is something that has scale to it that we can manage. Now, industrial site can probably take something bigger, but if you're talking about converting some existing commercial space, then you want to make sure that it fits into the context of that commercial space. I don't know what that means. I will tell you, having grown up in Louisville, the Bourbon folks have figured this out. Yeah. So that's not a problem. I mean, you go to downtown Louisville and walk down the street now, there's a mini distillery where you can go in tasting rooms, right? And now, but that's very different from what you're describing. It seems to me that there may be some value as you sort through this to look at what, again, the surrounding communities have done, but also talk with our licensing commission, because they've been trying to be careful about how whole issue of liquor licenses goes and alcohol beverage service and things like that. Just to get a sense of what might appear on their radar that we ought to be sensitive to. I mean, we may not pick up on it, but they might. And then the last thing I want to think about is just do we put into some difficulty those properties or restaurants that don't want to do this? You know, I mean, there may be some value in a few, but I don't know exactly where. If we're talking about village center zoning, do we want a brewery in every village center or?
You know, I don't think every restaurant is going to do it. Restaurants serve alcohol, they serve beer, and that's good enough for them. The ones that want to brew it on site, and for instance, Trillium in some of these, they'll brew it somewhere else. They'll take a spot and they will bring it there and also allow people to take away and bring growlers, things like that. So it's not always the need to brew it on site, but I don't think every restaurant's gonna say I'm a brewery now.
No, and it's expensive equipment, like it's a big investment.
Yeah.
So I think there may be some value in a lot, well, I guess they can still sell craft beer that they make themselves, right? There's nothing to make them, I mean, not on site, but they could make it somewhere else
Right,
themselves.
that's what I was saying, yes, they can brew it in a larger facility and bring it in, and that can be an
Yeah,
outpost of
so I
their
think you're
brewery.
really talking about the question of what is manufactured locally at the same time, right? Is that clear? Am I getting it right?
And bottle, so the
Yeah,
key,
yeah,
right, Joe?
brewed and
is-
bottled.
is the bottling.
Yeah, it's the bottling piece that.
That's the piece of that, I think, really is the part that I hope we can sort through, because it does involve trucks and involve cleanup and the model law and all of those things that I guess I would just like to learn a little more about how you manage those impacts in the context, you know?
I think there could be some, I know Joe laid out 3 options in his memo, and one of them was just adapting our current restaurant and retail allowances. That has some downsides in that, like he mentioned, we don't allow that in manufacturing, and we're kind of fitting into some existing rules. The other 2 were creating new uses, one that was a little more expansive than the other. There could be some value in creating the new use and then setting standards for it, or varying what zone is allowed in by size. Like we currently have a distinction in retail, right, under 5,000, over 5,000 square feet, and what zones that's allowed in, and by special permit versus by right. We could do a similar thing with this, particularly if we created a new use for it and allow for some larger facilities, say in manufacturing areas, and some smaller facilities in some of our commercial zones.
That sounds good to me,
But
but I do leave it to you guys.
So you're taking the manufacturing zone and making some of those properties more valuable. In a real manufacturing, you know,
Yeah.
yes, what would ever thought we'd actually make things?
Manufacture beer, I'm.
Sorry, Counselor Danber next, and then Counselor Wright.
Yes, it
Owen, okay.
brings me back to 1987, when I first worked for Sam Adams Beer. When they were only 3 years into making light beers. And they were brewing at that point, I think it was something like 60,000 barrels a year, and now they're into the millions. That's not what I would envision in Newton, and I don't think that's what we're looking at here. But I think that bringing craft beers and brewing into Newton is a marvelous idea. I think of Jack's Abbey that would be appropriate for some of our manufacturing zones. And then they could bring their beers into Union Street and have a tasting room and spreading. Jack's Abbey is all over the place. Everybody has a tap for Jack's Abbey beer.
You're on a Framingham.
Yeah, it's on Framingham, yeah.
And they have a restaurant.
They do. And so I think that the possibilities here, you've laid out a few here, but the possibilities are endless. And I think that they're all good. The bottling, of course, wouldn't happen on a place like Union Street, because the bottling facility needs a lot of square footage to be able to handle that. But the bottling could happen in a manufacturing area. We've got spaces in Newton where that would be appropriate. And I remember a year or two ago, where there was a brewer, who brewed outside, who, he was in Ward 1 on, Galen Street. And he went out of business because we could not accommodate him. In the summer, he wanted to do tastings and bring his product into the villages, and we couldn't accommodate him. But so I think it's time that we remedy that now and look at what we can do. We're looking at trying to make our villages more active and bringing people in who enjoy eating and who enjoy tasting brews and craft beers. It's a lot of people have this as a hobby. You're not.
I love everything you said. One thing we do need to say, and they were doing it illegally, but Hopsters was bottling in their spot. They're no longer there. They had the brewing in the basement. I went and took a look at the whole thing. And they were bottling upstairs. So we do want, it can be a small
It can
boutique.
be a small operation.
And we need to have them be allowed to be bottling on site. So,
Yeah.
I
sorry.
think we have to do a brewery crawl.
Yes.
Field trip, so we really don't.
Site visit like we do on land use, I think that's a good idea.
So I think I've this is it for me for now, but I think that we should move this forward, have another meeting soon on this and let's put this in place because we're gonna be losing out to our neighboring communities if we don't do something here.
So I missed Councilor Leary before, so I'm gonna go to
I
Councilor Leary.
want to say you'll all be coming to Ward 1, okay? California Street, it's just, this is perfect for the new zoning that we've been discussing. We just had the last meeting on Thursday and that was my excuse for missing the meeting. It literally, this is like a total match, right? Each one of these zoning options. And I would envision a small bottler along there, the manufacturing districts on California Street as well, and think about being right by the river, enjoying.
Perfect place for
locally brewed-
beer garden.
Yes, so, I certainly, I guess we have to go into some of the details, how exactly it would work, but I totally support this idea and can't wait to see it come to fruition.
Fruition.
Yeah.
Place to permit on this?
So I don't think we should limit or exclude bottling in the village centers. I think it should be a volume, because if someone's starting out and, you know, they're expanding and they want to try it or whatever, and if it's going to get too big, then they need to move it elsewhere, but we should not be excluding bottling in the village centers, but more of a size. The option 3 talks about other activities too, craft activities, which I'd like to see, but if it's gonna take too long, maybe that can be a follow-on.
Cross that one out.
Why?
Because it goes a little bit too far and complicates things.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If we want to do something quick, maybe do that and maybe look at it later, you know, to add those other ones, because you know, why just beer, you know?
That's what their thought as well, but we thought we'd kind of focus and can always do that.
So is this just beer and doesn't include wine? If someone wants to make wine and have a little
You
restaurant?
know, it could be Bully Boy, it could be any libation.
And
We could start doing bourbon.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to limit it to the libation. It has to be to the act of brewing any
Craft beverage.
Craft
I think was
beverage?
What you were.
Yeah, I think that's how I left
Right,
it.
yeah.
That's the language that Cambridge uses, and it's very open to interpretation.
Well, again, I think the issue we need is scale and impact.
Yeah.
That's really what, you don't want to end up with somebody coming up and saying, look, my life is now a mess because there's all this stuff spilling over into my backyard. So, but certainly to encourage our commercial areas to have a little opportunities and combine them.
And when I read these options, you know, I do defer to the zoning experts here to figure out the best path. I mean, when I read them, everything makes sense. But I want you guys to find the best way to do it and bring it to us, unless anybody has anything to say about options 1 and 2 here. It can be complicated.
I do have something to say. I think the manufacturing zone is a place to explicitly allow the use, seems to me, right? Then the question is, as an ancillary use to the existing restaurant, is there some opportunity there that is of limited scale that allows someone to try something out, but doesn't overwhelm and again, this is where the licensing folks, I think, need to be involved, because again, part of the challenge of serving alcohol even now is the problem of people taking it away from the site. So if you're going to make it into a store rather than,
It's really a hybrid of a store and a restaurant.
right.
That's what a brewery is.
All the controversy that came up during the COVID about whether you could have takeout of alcohol, from establishments and how that all worked. I think it may be worth just going back and rewinding the tape on a little of that to see how that might inform some of this decision making that you all recommended.
They did allow that, and a few years ago, they've allowed now, you don't finish your bottle of wine, you're allowed to cap it and take it with you. So certain things have loosened up that fall in line with what a brewery allows to do as well.
Well, during COVID, I bought growlers. You could bring them into restaurants and bars and they fill it up and you can take it home.
Does everybody know what a growler is?
No.
A growler is,
4 ounces?
Is it 64 ounces, it's reusable, you have it at home and you can take it to the brewery and fill it up and take it away instead of getting a bunch of.
It's like a big bottle.
bottles.
Big bottle, yeah.
It's more sustainable.
So this is the poor man's Methuselah for.
Okay, folks.
Okay.
I think, I'm sure,
Yeah.
oh, John Sisson, I didn't introduce you at the beginning. I only saw you at the beginning of this item. Do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Am I off mute? Thank goodness. I need a little.
You're kind of inaudible. Is there?
I'm sorry. I'm at home past my bedtime. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think we need to complicate it. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Economic Development Commission, but at our last meeting, they were thrilled to hear of this discussion. And I would say their general sentiment was make it happen. So I think in terms of bottling works, I've talked to Joe about this. I don't think that we need to worry too much about regulating bottling works in the city of Newton, because the real estate here is entirely too expensive for any bottling works to ever locate here. We don't have a 10-acre site next to the interstate like Needham does, and I'm certain the one at Needham is probably on the chopping block like Muzzy Ford was. So I'm not too worried about bottling works. Plus, if we strike that from our zoning ordinance, we don't have to worry about regulating bottling works because we won't allow them. I like one of the members of the commission did speak about the difference between beer and bread, and biologically, there's not a great deal of difference between beer and bread. We do not care how a baker packages a loaf of bread, but for some reason, we're very upset about how someone puts beer into a bottle. In fact, we don't really think that brewers are going to be using bottles much more. Cans are much less expensive and not as noisy either. So in terms of scale, I'm not too worried about scale. If you are a small restaurant, say you're Union Street, or you are, say, the person who's taking over the lease at Burke's Ale Works in West Newton, you're not going to overwhelm the neighborhood with your bottling works or your can works. You're hoping to bring a lot of people in, and hopefully you'll have a better menu and it's a good augmentation. So I think my point, if I'm in a roundabout way here, is to keep it simple. If we eliminate bottling works, that's all set. If we can simply augment our restaurant uses to allow craft beverages, which could be kombucha or any other legal beverage, I think that would be great. And then if we want to look at, I think as Councilor Baker and Councilor Danberg have pointed out, look at our manufacturing and industrial sites for larger scale, we should do that as well. But for the short term, I'd love to get our, we have at least 2 people interested in brew pubs, one in Newton Center and one in West Newton. I'd love to get those happening quickly. And we can dig into the other stuff later. And just for the record, the state brewer, what is it? The brewer license that the ABCC gives out, they can sell, I think, 2 6-packs per transaction of beer produced on site without a local liquor license. I'm sure they would like to have a local liquor license as well, so that they can sell other beers and wine and so forth. But yeah, I'd really love to keep this as simple as possible and maybe get the first thing through. And that's me as a beer lover.
Thank you, John. I spoke with Jen Kyra a bit about the timing of this, and we don't normally hold public hearings in the summer, but we have meetings in July. So probably we need to look at an ordinance. If the ordinance can be drafted by one of our July meetings, which we need to establish, but they'll both be, of course, after the week of the 4th. And if we can look at an ordinance, then we can set a public hearing for early September. That's about the quickest we'll be able to do it. I think we all have somewhat of an interest in doing it quickly. Great to hear there's a couple of prospective businesses ready to jump. Councilor Wright.
Just trying to think of everything. We were talking about, mostly beer, but there's also marijuana infused hard cider and things like that. Would we allow something like that in the marijuana stores or not, or this would cover them or not, or? Because that's a possibility too.
Beverages are already in the marijuana stores.
Yeah, but what if they want to produce it then? We'll allow them to do it at those stores?
Excuse me, pardon me. I don't think the ABC has oversight of marijuana infused beverages. I believe that would be separately regulated. So if we're going through the Alcohol and Beverages Commission.
We have in our zoning for the marijuana,
Good question.
if they are similar or the same as another use, except for the fact that it involves marijuana, that they can't fall under that other category. Like we have separate marijuana research and development, marijuana manufacturing. So the beverage production would not fall under this.
Okay.
An unrelated question, but it's in this paragraph. Do we not allow pottery making in Newton? Because I was reading the sentence and it seemed to imply that.
Yeah, I think you could in manufacturing and limited manufacturing, but there's no explicit sort of artisanal type use that would really enable that.
Yeah. A lot of these things get interpreted into other uses. They don't necessarily fit neatly because it just wasn't thought of at the time, but
if somebody wanted to have a kiln and make pottery in Newton, would that be okay?
I imagine they would find a use that fit into.
I think an artist, how could you not allow that?
Yeah.
You could do that in your.
Yes.
So if we're gonna have blacksmithing, we're gonna allow. Yes, we have a motion to hold this item. We'll take it up in July. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? Item carries unanimously. We'll look forward to talking again in July, but seriously, we should do a field trip. Yeah.
Get a short bus.
Free town.
I live down the street from my.
We are. Thank